Hello, it's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're going to have to come up with some new tricks, aren't we, together? We're going to have to, because this is going to be a rough ride. This is going to be a very, very bumpy ride, and you know the importance during the time we spend together every morning. And you might now be thinking that I'm talking about you and your general equilibrium. I'm talking about mine just as much as yours. So we have to find ways during this time that we're going to be spending together every morning in the coming months to make sure that we can keep the lights on, that we can, crikey, in some cases literally, but I mean more in an emotional and a mental sense, to make sure that we can keep the keep the spirits high, or as high as they can be, and remember that this too will pass. It's always a helpful philosophy that this too will pass. But of course, the more you're struggling and the more you're suffering, perhaps the less reassuring sometimes it can be to know that it will actually end. That light at the end of the tunnel is real and not, as sometimes seems the case, the headlights of a train coming towards you. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. Two quick thoughts. Appalling judgment. Yesterday, the Prime Minister failed to understand her own energy cap. Not her own energy cap, I suppose. Energy price cap. She brought it in, or it was brought in, presumably having been put together during that dreadful period of endless hustings, or thereabouts. But the point being, she somehow failed, or she somehow went live on the radio and misrepresented it. Misrepresented is too kind a word. The idea that you could give people the wrong story after she's been picked up on it by full fact. You know, and I know how it works. I didn't understand it immediately. I'll be honest with you. When it was first announced, before I read the detail, I thought no one would be paying more than £2,500 for energy, which in a big house, in a very big house in the country, would be a huge cut, wouldn't it? In the energy. So that's when I realised, no, hang on, I must have got this wrong. That can't be right. So what it is it's a cap on the unit price. I think this is worth explaining again, if only for the benefit of Liz Truss. There's a cap on each unit of energy that you use. That can no longer be above a certain level. And when you add up all the accounts in the country and divide them by the number of accounts in the country, then you come up with £2,500. That is the average energy bill after the unit price has been capped. But lots and lots of people, of course, will be paying more than that. And I still think lots of them probably don't realise it. And I was worried that might sound condescending until the actual Prime Minister who introduced the energy price cap went on the radio yesterday and revealed that she doesn't understand it either. How important do you think that is? I do not know. And the other epic misjudgment in the news today, and there's a journalist, I don't know if you've come across him yet. I hope cursing journalists doesn't become my new sideline after the curse of O'Brien struck so many Tories when I dared to suggest cautiously that one of the members of the Conservative ranks was looking sort of quasi-human or possibly even mildly impressive, and then within minutes their entire reputation falls apart. I think Nadeem Zahawi was the last one to fall foul of that. I told you, didn't I? I got a message of a former cabinet minister saying, please don't praise me on the radio. Because I've seen what happens to the Michael Gove. Oh, what an embarrassing roll call that is for me. But here's another epic misjudgment, in my opinion, and one that was not actually done in public, or at least it was done in a restaurant, but not on a radio station that the entire country was listening to. Actually, it wasn't. It was done at home. The hedge fund manager who's profited from the fall in the value of the pound and government debt went round to Kwasi Kwarteng's house for lunch on July the 17th, when there were still 6 candidates in the running for Tory leadership. I mean, this fella's name is Crispin Odey, just to give it a real air of that brilliant drama Succession. Have you watched Succession? You must watch Succession. If you haven't watched Succession, consider this to be my good deed for the day. Get hold of it. Crispin Odey used to be married to one of Rupert Murdoch's daughters. How mad is that? The idea that the world we live in has this tiny little pinnacle at the top of the pyramid where they all sort of know each other and knock about together and marry each other. And Kwasi Kwarteng had him round to his house. A source familiar with the meeting has told The Times that Kwarteng, who was, of course, business secretary at the time, met in a personal capacity and did not discuss any plans for government. They said that when the lunch took place, it was unclear whether Truss would make it to the final 2. I would have thought, shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. The fellow who made a gazillion pounds by shorting the pound on the night that Brexit broke. It's made another ton of money by shorting the pound after the government announced policies that were objectively ridiculous. You can tell how ridiculous they are because the only people defending them in the newspapers today are Daniel Hannan and Kate Andrews, who used to, of course, work at the IEA. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. So two things there. Chancellor knocking about, breaking bread with people who exist to make money out of economic crises just seems to me to be odd. And a Prime Minister still not fully au fait with her own energy cap policy, which means that it's more than likely lots of people in the public at large will be similarly confused and or ignorant about what it really means. I'm keeping it a bit calmer today, because if I don't, I might actually burst a blood vessel. The polls that came out last night were triple take territory. I don't know at what point you saw them. I was about to do a sort of a corporate event, and the Twitter, I just check Twitter before I go on stage just to see if there's anything I can reveal. It's always nice that, because the audience might not have checked it. They're too busy chatting and you're backstage waiting to go on the front. You think, oh, I wonder that. And I saw these polls, the YouGov one in particular, and I thought it was a joke. I thought someone had put together a fake account, and then I saw who'd retweeted it or where it had come from, and I thought, well, that's a little bit odd. I mean, that looks real. And then I actually went to YouGov's site and scrolled down a bit, and there, lo and behold, there it was. 33-point lead for Labour with YouGov, a 21-point lead with Survation, a 19-point lead with Delta Poll, and a 17-point lead with Redfield and Wilton. The last one interesting because that's the biggest lead Redfield and Wilton have ever seen as well. So even though it's the lowest of the four, it's the biggest they have ever seen. And then this morning, another one came in bang on the 20. So your first thought is, good Lord, those poor saps who've spent the last 2 or 3 years thinking that anyone who said that any other leader would have been 20 points ahead of Theresa May back in 2018. They've spent 4 years now pretending that meant we also believed that any other leader would be 20 points ahead of Boris Johnson in 2021. They're now crucified by their own idiocy, their own stupidity, by pretending that they believed that when nobody genuinely did. They now have to sort of get hoisted by their own absurdity. That was the first thought. The second thought, of course, was flipping heck. I mean, that these are not normal numbers. This is a lead the like of which the Labour Party has never seen before. And it's sort of come from nowhere in terms of the numbers, in terms of what the graph has done, the gradient, what it's done. Imagine the opposite of what the pound did after Kwasi Kwarteng announced his new economic policy. That's what Labour's polling numbers have done. Not quite over the same period. So, you've all seen the graph of the pound tootling along. It's gone down to... Whoa, poor lada! It's gone down... I nearly said something a little bit music hall and rude there, but I'm very glad I didn't. It's gone down faster than butcher's elbow. The opinion polling numbers of the Labour Party have done the exact opposite. They've sort of been tootling along. Everybody expects, traditionally, a honeymoon period. So the relief of getting rid of Boris Johnson, which is fairly widespread, except in the hardcore membership of the Conservative Party. A little bit of relief at getting rid of Boris Johnson. Liz Truss winning, winners usually get a little bit of a boost. The winners, the victors boost, if you like, the victors Viagra. And, of course, the idea that she'd made bold and swig-ping statements very early in her tenure, you could realistically have expected what they call a honeymoon period. So you'd see a slight improvement in the polls for the Conservative Party because they'd got a new leader. They'd had a bit of a clear-out. Holy McMoly. What is the opposite of a honeymoon? I guess it's being jilted at the altar, isn't it? And Liz Truss is looking pretty close to having been jilted at the altar by the electorate, albeit that she did just get a ring on her finger. That's one of the most torturous and poor analogies I think I've ever employed on the programme, and goodness knows it's a crowded field. So here we are at 30 minutes after 10, looking at absolutely astonishing poll numbers and wondering two things. The first thing we're wondering is, do we ever really have interesting conversations about opinion polls? What goes up must go down? In this case, I think, yes, necessarily. With the 33 lead, I can't see that translating into an election result. If it did, there'd be about 60 Tories. I'll say that again, 60 Tories in the House of Commons if that YouGov poll was translated into an election result. Isn't that incredible? There'd be golf clubs up and down the land advertising for a new manager, and they'd be getting applications from 200 recently unemployed Tory MPs who aren't fit for much else. Actually, that's not fair on golf club managers. I apologise. That's quite a complicated job, I imagine. You've got to keep people sweet. You've got to have some people skills. So, question number one, can we have an interesting conversation about opinion polls? Well, to which the answer is, well, that's up to you, James. You've got to ask us the right question. Question number two, then, is this the right question? This is the one that most interests me. Because you look at this number, and let's focus on the 33, because that's fun, right? And it is just epic. It's huge. It's unbelievable. Possibly literally unbelievable. But let's not complicate things. 33-point lead for the Labour Party that has come more or less out of nowhere. So and this will only just include Labour conference, right? What do you think the single biggest reason is for the explosion in support for Keir Starmer's Labour Party this week, right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I'll take whatever you've got. I mean, ideally, your personal position. The reason why I am part of the explosion in support for Keir Starmer's Labour Party is James ... It could be, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I am enduringly fascinated by how much of it is disillusion with the other lot, how much of it is Labour actually winning your admiration as opposed to the Conservatives losing it. It's not as simple as that, is it? Because just because you've fallen out with love with the Tory party doesn't mean you're going to start voting for the Labour Party. Quite the opposite in recent years. But Keir Starmer has clearly turned around that particular oil tanker, that toxicity of the brand that people on the doorstep were being told about. All the time during the 2019 election, everybody reporting back to me that the doorsteps were just giving so much negative opinion on the last leader of the Labour Party. He's turned that around. But why such a huge explosion? Unprecedented. And indeed close to unbelievable, almost certainly unsustainable. But who knows? Who knows? We talked about the light at the end of the tunnel for the population in general, for the country at large, just 10 minutes ago. For Liz Truss, what does the light at the end of the tunnel look like for Liz Truss? I honestly couldn't tell you, and I do this for a living. I tell you that if I had come up with a policy that had caused the pound to tank and compelled the Bank of England to intervene to undo some of the damage being done to the country by the policy I introduced on Friday, I wouldn't be deriving an enormous amount of confidence from the fact that the Daily Mail is still giving Daniel Hannan a full page to explain why he understands everything better than Mark Carney, the Bank of England, the IMF, the Economist, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, your mum's best friend and your window cleaner's cat. Whatever anybody else thinks, Daniel Hannan knows best, and that's over 6 years since the Brexit vote. But let's not get bogged down in that. Let's look exclusively at this. You talk to me either as an amateur analyst, i.e. looking at the pictures and thinking, I know why it's blown up. I know why this support has exploded. I know why these polls are so incredible. Or tell me why you're part of them. You're part of the number. And as ever on the programme, I'm always more interested in talking to people who are slightly surprised to find themselves where they find themselves this morning. So even if you were going back 6 months or 6 years, you'd be very surprised if I had told you that on Friday, September the 30th, 2022, not only would the Labour Party have just recorded their largest ever lead in opinion polls, but that you personally were part of that support. Sometimes the simplest question is the best question. And today I hope that proves to be the case. Labour have seen their poll support explode in the last week. Why? 0345 6060 973. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. It is a big deal. It is a very, very surprising result, or perhaps not, but it is unprecedented. And there's a word that we probably use too much. In fact, I'd say in recent years we've been using the word unprecedented an unprecedented number of times. But then we are living quite arguably in unprecedented times. This Labour poll, or indeed all of the Labour polls, why? Why is it happening? Why has there been an explosion in the last week? And if you're part of it, I want to know why. If you're not part of it, but you're watching it like me, I want to know why. Daisy is in Chelsea to kick things off. Daisy, what would you like to say?
Just that I have always voted, I voted Conservative, I voted Lib Dem in the last election because, like you said, some people would just vote, they wouldn't vote Labour if they were Tory, but they wanted the Tories out. But actually recently I listened to Keir Starmer's speech on the conference, yes. And actually I felt like he was very genuine, and I feel like I'd never thought in a million years that I would ever have voted Labour, but if there was an election now, I'd vote Labour. And honestly, there'd be people that went to uni with me that would literally, they'd be literally shaking, oh my gosh, because I was such a staunch Tory.
At university? Surely there were better things to do at university, Daisy.
I used to run the Conservative Society.
I'm saying nothing. Seriously, we had a tequila society at my university. That surely would have been a much better use of your time.
We had port, wine and cheese nights, so that was how Tory it was.
Well, I don't know what to say. It's almost like you're living your life backwards.
But yeah, that's what I always say to people. I used to get warned, the warning, never be too radical in your youth for fear of being conservative as you age, but I've literally gone the opposite way.
and the big kicker was Starmer at conference, just seeing someone, after a very odd few years, seeing someone stand at the front, and an odd few years across both main parties, just to see a leader who... Sorry, I'm talking over you.
Sorry. I think just what he said about home ownership as well. I mean, we're like pretty middle class. We don't get much help. We're not that affected by the budget. But for us, home ownership is just slipping away. We're not going to be able to do it. And he talked about how he wants to change that. And I know it's always very like, we want to do this, we want to do that. But I just feel like I can't buy into it anymore. People having like 10 properties. I think something needs to be done.
And a vote for Keir Starmer would be the first step in that direction. You have been successfully persuaded.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's what I believe after that speech.
Do you keep in touch with any of the old Port and Stilton crew?
I don't. I just to think where they are now.
Well, they're almost certainly working for a think tank, I imagine.
Imagine so.
Daisy, take care. Thank you. Perfect. So can I ask how old you are, or would that be rude? Oh, she's gone. Mick's in Harlow. Mick, I nearly said question or answer then. It feels a bit like that this week. It's been one of those weeks where every hour has been mystery hour. What's going on, Mick?
I haven't got the answers, James. I'm sorry, mate.
What have you rung me for then?
I said to your research, I'm more used to ringing football phone-ins. But end of the day, James, I'm so angry.
Go on.
People can't afford to feed their kids. I've got my brother back living with me, who's in his early 20s with his wife.
Yeah.
Because their mortgages increased so much that it's just in the last 7 days. It's just how are they allowed to get away with this, James? It's just why are people not rioting? I know that, but why are people not out in the streets and just... People can't afford to feed their kids, James.
There's a story today about a quarter of, just in case anybody is lucky enough, Mick, to be insulated from what you're describing, there's a story in the news today about 1 in 4 hospitals setting up food banks for their own nurses.
Shit. James, sorry, I've got a disabled son. I've got a disabled son.
Right.
He's got cerebral palsy. I do my best by him.
Of course you do.
I'm at work. Like I say, my brother's living with me. We're lucky. We get by. Like I mentioned football. I'm not on the bread. I'm a West Ham season ticket.
Yeah.
And I do. Okay. Like, I don't know why I've mentioned that. But,
well, I do. If I could suggest why you've mentioned it, because it's when you're doing your annual finances, that's actually quite a big outgoing. So it's the fact that you can still afford it means that the wolf isn't at the door just yet.
Yeah, like if I was, at least I can take my boy to football. You know what I mean? But
yeah, I do. Know what you mean.
I'm lucky, but people can't afford. Like, I go down to my son's in a special needs school.
Right.
Everyone's struggling. Like, we can't. And there's rumours this morning. I know this is slightly off topic, but benefits to be cut.
It's not a rumour. It's a failure to deny it by government when they come to have a look at making savings. The people on benefits may have their payments squeezed next year, so they put them up in line with wages, perhaps rather than with inflation, which means in real terms they would be less well off. Yes, that is out
James,
there.
James, sorry.
On. That's all right.
What will it take? What will it take for people to work? How many people died? I know I'm going back. How many people died in COVID because of their incompetence? And what will it take for people to like? Like if I say I am a Labour voter, but I'm open to. I've voted for David Cameron.
There you go.
Yeah. So like, because he was a more personable person. Yeah.
Yeah.
This like if I use this analogy. If I went down the pub with David Cameron, I was like, actually, yeah, you're all right. But this other
remember,
lot,
if you do go down the pub with David Cameron, remember to make sure he hasn't left his daughter behind by mistake.
No, but this or Boris.
Yeah.
Like I don't even want to waste my breath on that geezer. I really don't.
Don't worry, you don't have to. But you're not talking about personalities.
I know he's strong, but he's got blood on his hands, James. He's got blood on his hands of thousands of people, and no one cares. Like, what? I know this is taken...
You've got a lot on your plate, Mick, at the moment, haven't you? I can tell.
I'm sorry, James.
No,
I'm
you
sorry.
don't need to apologise to me. You don't need to apologise to anyone. And it's not yourself you're worried about. That's why you mentioned that your season ticket. You're looking at your brother. You're looking at your boy. You're looking at the wider world. You're just conscious of the fact that this feels utterly unsustainable.
And like, can I just use a football analogy one more time?
Go on, then.
If West Ham were getting bad results, lost 10 in a row, like, and playing in League Two,
yes,
people would be on the pitch asking for the chairman and the manager's head. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but if we're going to go down this route, then I have to come back and point out to you that you would still never stop supporting West Ham, would you?
Yeah, but I wouldn't support the bloody Tories, would I?
Well, that's the problem. That's why they're still on 21%, Mick, because they're going to keep supporting them even if they're playing in the National League North and they've been relegated for 6 seasons straight.
James, you've done me.
It's one of my pet theories, mate. We call it footballification, but you make a very good point. It's why the theory falls down ultimately. Can I just ask briefly about your brother? He's moved in with you because they're putting the house on the market or they're putting it up for rent? I'm not a financial expert, James, but he does part rent, part buy. Mm-hmm. So, and he's more like he wants to get out. He wants to get out and move into. He's in a flat. He wants to move into a house. Right.
Yeah, I mean, but his part rent, part buy deal's gone up. He just can't.
So what's he done? Give back the keys, or is he just sitting and waiting?
He's still in there at the moment, but he's with me. So
okay.
Because he works from home. Like he's working from home at the moment. Right. He's coming back. He's just trying to get his house in order, James. If you pardon the expression.
Oh, I understand.
Oh, mate, I've got my head's spinning.
I know it is.
You've taken the brunt of it. Yeah.
Of course.
Because in the pandemic, I was at home with my boy because he was shielding and stuff.
Yes, of course.
And there was no football on, so I weren't listening to any other station.
I feel your pain, Mick. I feel your pain.
So, James, I just say thank you from the bottom of my heart, really.
Oh,
because you just kept me sane. And I know people say that, but genuinely.
Thank you, Mick. And you look after yourself, all right?
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Take it easy. Didn't even ask him the question, did he? I mean, I said he did, though, in ways that I think most of us would struggle to match for power. Why has the Labour leadership, why has the Labour lead in the opinion polls exploded in the last 24 hours? And, of course, it is looking at research that will go back over the last 4 or 5 days. So we'll say give or take a week. And it hasn't just gone up, because that's why we don't talk about opinion polls. It was a 4-point lead last week, and it's a 6-point lead this week, and a 2-point loss the week before. This is just off the scale. It's mammoth. And it's not just one poll either. It's 5, the lowest of which has them on a 17-point lead. And that is the highest lead that particular polling company has ever recorded. I know you'll still be listening, mate. A lot of love coming in for you. A lot of respect as well. That ability to articulate your feelings and not being frightened of sharing them is something that an awful lot of people admire. What a cracking bloke, says Trisha in Edinburgh. Enjoy your football, Mick. You deserve it. And I think most of us would second that. But let's get back to the question next of what's happened. Why this week? Why now? Why Starmer? 0345 6060 973. Holly Harris is here with your headlines. 10:34 is the time. I'm going to read this from Ken because, mate, I don't know whether you've ever listened to this programme before, but I do not need a lesson in what it's actually like to be in the National League North. So with Mick there, a little bit of football banter, which obviously he's going to be much better at than I am. But when I talk about West Ham ending up in the National League North, I do so, Ken from Kidderminster, because that's where my team are. I know exactly what it's like to support a team in the National League North. So for you to text me and say Kidderminster, who were robbed by West Ham at Agborough last season, are in the National League North, it's not to be sniffed at. Ken, I was there. I was standing behind the dugout, mate. I was throwing my sister in the air when that first goal went in and weeping like something out of a Greek tragedy when that equaliser went in the final minute of extra time. So I'm always happy, Kenneth, to put my hands up and admit that I need lessons in various areas, not least fiscal policy and economics, but not in what it feels like to be a supporter of Kidderminster Harriers in the National League North. I've got to come up with a topic soon for a Celebrity Mastermind. And I've been thinking about, the problem with football clubs, they've got so much history. I've got to find something smaller. In fact, if you've got any ideas on what I could do for Celebrity Mastermind, I'll take any suggestions at the moment. I've got a couple. I'll share them with you during a less serious conversation, because we are just wondering why The support for the Labour Party in the last week has exploded, and you could not imagine two more contrasting calls than the first two that we've taken. Daisy, former luminary of the University Conservatory Society, that'd be quite a bit niche, wouldn't it? The University Conservative Society, where she used to feast upon Port and Stilton with her fellow student Tories, now absolutely convinced that she's going to vote, or absolutely convinced by Sir Keir Starmer. And then Mick, who himself has voted for David Cameron in the past, looking at what is on the horizon for families like his own and just wondering why people are not rioting in the streets. I hesitate to say it, but there could be the two extremes of position there, the two extremes of answer to that question. What's happened? Why? Unbelievable. 10:36 is the time. Pat's in Truro. Pat, what would you like to say? What do you reckon?
Hello, James.
Hello,
It's
Pat.
an honour to speak to you.
Don't be ridiculous, Pat.
Well,
Hopefully
I've
a pleasure,
spoken-
never an honour, never an honour.
I've never spoken to you before, and you've kept me sane and educated over the last few weeks,
How
so
kind.
thank you.
Thank you.
Basically, I'm a middle-of-the-road voter, always have been, Lib Dem through and through, so my vote has never really come to anything,
Right.
but I still ploughed on, and I've never voted Tory, I've never voted Labour,
Okay.
but I genuinely think I will vote Labour this time.
It's very important, your point, because it's easy to forget that this kind of boost in the polls means that he's drawing support, Labour is drawing support from many other places than just floating or Conservative voters. You're a lifelong Lib Dem, but he's got your vote.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Well, in recent, I'd say 52-48, if you'll excuse me.
Yes, go on.
It always mostly still because I am desperate to get these criminals out.
Crikey.
I am so sad to see what they have done to this country and how people still believe in them. I just cannot understand it. But more and more, I'm thinking of voting Labour because I genuinely like what I heard the other day.
That's interesting. Well, it's doubly. I mean, 52-48 is actually probably accurate, even though it's slightly ironic for obvious reasons, because it's as if things are so bad now that actually changing the government is more important than casting your traditional vote. So that is almost like a catalyst to reviewing your options in the ballot box. But then that would not necessarily be enough to get you over the line if the thing that you were contemplating doing differently were not so, to your mind, so compelling and attractive.
Yes.
Gosh. And is it him? Is it the man? Is it the policies? What I mean, is there a single thing, a single hook we can hang your hat on, Pat?
I liked the look of him initially. He disappointed me because he didn't seem to stand for anything. I could never have voted for Corbyn. It just wouldn't have happened.
No.
But in that speech, to hear him talk about a nationalised company owned by us that would look around the country to find the best renewable energy sources, put money into that, put money into insulating houses. It made so much sense to me, and I've been thinking it for so long. And why is nobody talking about this? It's just wonderful. It was inspiring.
I think that's a slow burner as well, you know, because, of course, not everybody follows conference speeches, not everybody follows current affairs radio programmes, not everybody takes a newspaper, but that's going to filter through. You can imagine conversations happening over the dinner table, can't you? You know what he's going to do, don't you, if he gets in?
I hope so.
I hope so as well, obviously. I like it, Pat. Thank you. Did you enjoy your debut?
Oh, I'm a bit nervous. It's a bit like sitting outside the headmaster's office.
Well, not in my day, because that means you're about to get beaten. So it's not.
It's lovely to hear those names coming up from the Midlands from my childhood as well.
Where did you grow up?
Stourbridge.
Oh, blimey.
But my parents lived in Bewdley towards the end of their life.
I'm in Bewdley next month for the festival, actually. I'm doing a gig there. I'm really looking forward to it. It feels like a home fixture, Pat.
The accent's coming out now I'm talking to you.
There's nothing wrong with that. You should see me after a few Bathams. 10:39 is the time to something at the Archers. Michael is in Pontefract. Michael, what would you like to say?
First of all, I can't believe I'm talking to James O'Brien.
Oh, let's stop this now. This is all. We're having too much kindness, and well, unless you're about to abuse me roundly, Michael.
Not at all. No, although I am worried that I'm going to get clipped and put in idiot's corner, but that's another thing.
Don't be
anyway,
silly.
sticking to the matter in hand,
Yes.
I'm speaking as a proud member of Cooper's Troopers, which is the campaign group for Yvette Cooper up
Okay.
in God's own country.
Yes.
Now, so I'm going to tell you, it's purely what people think to tell me on the doorstep. Now, we speak to quite a lot of floating voters and those that voted Tory in 2019
Yes,
as
of
well.
course, yes.
Now, what they're telling us is three things. One, they don't feel that the security that the Conservatives appeared to offer in 2019 that is there anymore. Is that there was a leader with a massive mandate, get Brexit done, very, very popular, that's what they wanted. Now, we've got a Prime Minister with, is it 20% of the Parliamentary Tory party support or something of that kind?
Yeah, something like that.
It's
in the first round, I mean, that's when they had 6 choices.
Yeah.
The numbers obviously went up the more the field narrowed. So she was a lot of people's second choice.
So there is that. A lot of the ones we spoke to were hoping for moderate, like Tom Toogood or someone like that, who is completely new. But the other thing is, she's now ripped up the rule book on economic policy completely. They've sidelined the OBR. I know they've got a forecast coming, but there were people which forced into that. And she's pretty much sticking dogmatically to the line of, we're going to get growth. But they're not seeing the numbers. It's the same problem Labour had in 2019. All our manifesto was essentially over stuff, wasn't it? People were saying, well, there's no way you can do all that in 5 years, in one term. No chance. So that, they don't like that either. They like to see how it's going to be paid for. And also, a bit of honesty, is it going to cost us more in taxes or something? Because people aren't stupid. They know either you raise taxes or you raise borrowing, one of the two.
What? Yeah, I mean, this is interesting, and of course, you know, the plural of anecdote is not data, but you're out there with your fellow Coopers troopers. You're on the doorstep. So these are all quite mild exchanges, and you haven't mentioned Brexit.
Yeah. Well, the reason that I've not mentioned Brexit is because where we are, it's becoming less of an issue. Because I think you did an excellent monologue a while ago on Brexit being the blindfold.
Yes.
About you said Brexit is in no way linked to the current cost of living crisis. You can't say, oh, we got Brexit done. Yeah, but your bills, it's not going to be 6k a year or 300 a year or something.
Yeah.
Brexit is becoming less important. They now want to see, right, okay, we did that, we've done that. What's next?
But the problem Starmer has when he gets into power is somehow addressing the fact that an awful lot of the problems we've got have been, if not caused, then enormously exacerbated by not being in the single market, by not being in the single market anymore.
Right, so, but then again, I'm thinking, well, Starmer has said that there are ways around that, and I'm hoping that it comes true once it does get in, things as it does. But then again, people will be looking for that and seeing what is the solution.
And then you're back to personality and the fact that he just seems trustworthy. He seems like competent and trustworthy. Right. So even if you even if you thought the last bloke was trustworthy, nobody thought he was competent.
I'm pleased you said that because one of the criticisms of Starmer is that he's boring. Right?
Yes.
I use that as a good thing on the doorstep because if you're boring, what does that mean? It means that you're not a showman, you don't get involved in the dramatics of it all, the theatrics, you're focused on policy. Corbyn, for the wrong reasons, wasn't boring. He was exciting, but for the wrong reasons, which alienated a lot of people. Starmer, I think the worst thing they've got on Starmer is he bought a donkey sanctuary or something for his mum. I think that's
but it wasn't quite that. It was just a field, actually, but the back of the house. Yeah. And his mum, who was progressively disabled throughout her life, one of the pleasures she had was looking out of the window at the donkeys that they'd rescued. That is, I think, so. Well, they did spend 2 weeks trying to turn a curry into a crime. Don't forget that.
Don't get me started on Beergate. You don't want to get started on that. You need to get on with your show. But that's the thing. That's a good thing, because if it's boring, he's focusing on policy.
And people like the idea of having a bank manager in charge of the money rather than perhaps the spiv who, if this was the Second World War, would be flogging nylon stockings out the back of his motorbike box or whatever it was that spivs used. Michael, I'm moving on only because you've taken me up to the junction. It's all there, isn't it? There's loads going on. I thought we'd just get mortgage after mortgage after mortgage calls, but we haven't even moved on to that yet. We may do that as a separate topic later in the programme, because there was a little... I don't watch Question Time anymore, but I do watch the clips the next day, like most people, and there was a woman describing what had happened this week to her mortgage that drew audible gasps from the rest of the audience, and so we'll probably have a look at that as well. But for now, we continue with the question, why? Why? Because this is unprecedented. This level of boost in such a short period of time for a political party, particularly one that has led by the same person for the last 3 years or 2 years, give or take. This isn't supposed to happen. So why has support for Labour exploded? And, if you were to read the room or the mood music of what we've discussed so far, it's a bit thick, isn't it, to suggest, it's either Starmer doing so well or it's the Tories doing so badly. They're like two legs of the same athlete. You don't get one without the other, I don't think. That's probably the big takeaway I've got at 10:45. It's 10:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Sometimes when you're listening to the radio and we come back from a junction and I sound surprised, that's because I am. That's because someone who has been working in radio, sometimes for many, many years, has just sort of been making small talk with me during the break, and then we get ambushed by the sting there. So it's no. You're not hearing things. Don't adjust your set. I do sometimes go, oh, great, hello. It's 10:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mike's in Maidstone. Mike, what's going on?
Hi, James. How you doing?
Pretty well, actually.
Good.
Well, all considered, I mean, it's nice talking to people like you. I'd rather the country was in a slightly healthier state than it's in, but it's on we go.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a bit worrying at the moment. Just talking of the question, really, about Labour, Keir Starmer.
Yes.
I've been a Conservative voter my whole life.
Right.
And I've been listening to, obviously, the Labour recently, and obviously with the hustings and stuff. The Conservatives, they're so angry at each other. They're arguing with each other. And, I'm seriously going to vote Labour for the first time ever in my life.
How much of that is down to Sir Keir Starmer?
A lot of it is to do with Keir Starmer. I think he's an honest person.
It's important, isn't it, after the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, everybody says they're honest, and I think the government say things and they try and continue to do that, but things happen and change it, and they don't redress it and say, well, I'm sorry, I got that wrong.
I think there weren't any parties. There were parties, but I didn't know about them. There were parties, but I didn't go to them. There were parties, but I did go to them, but I didn't realise they were parties. There were parties, and I got fined by the police for attending them. That broke something about the tradition of thinking all politicians are liars. There's liars, and then there's liars, and then there's a former director of public prosecutions on the other side of the river, isn't there? I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I'm a police officer as well myself, so
right.
And it's not because of that, and it's not because...
well, they've let you down as well. I mean, the just in terms of numbers, and then claiming that it wasn't... So what's changed? What's changed then in the last sort of month, if it is the last month? Maybe it's been a slightly longer period than that, but what is it that's crystallised your conviction?
I've got to weigh up whether it's because I think the Conservatives have failed, or because it's a different option to go with Labour, and I'm not going with that instinct, because that's not the right thing to do.
Yes.
It's whether you think Labour and Sir Keir Starmer and his team are going to be able to deliver and bring the country back in line. Because the Conservatives are failing. They're failing absolutely miserably, and it's worrying. COVID was worrying. Don't get me wrong, that was an absolute nightmare for everybody.
It wasn't self-inflicted, was it?
No, it wasn't, no. And, Boris Johnson, I love Boris Johnson, and I think he had a rough deal at the end there.
We're not going there today, Mike. You don't spoil my mood, Michael. Don't spoil my mood.
Well, I did like him. He was, he had his quirks and stuff, but he was...
I said don't go there, man, seriously.
Sorry,
had his quirks and stuff, good Lord. Henry VIII, he was a lovely bloke, a bit unkind to some of his wives, but he had his quirks, didn't he, when it comes to the old marriage, the old maritals. No, but so that is it. Starmer has tempted you, sort of, or is luring you over to the other side.
He has, and his team as well. Corbyn, not in a million years. He just didn't do it for me. He wasn't strong enough. It never even entered my mind. But since Keir Starmer's come on the... if Labour's listening, so Keir Starmer, keep being honest.
Keep being Keir. That should be the policy, shouldn't it? Keep being Keir.
Absolutely.
Be Keir. Go on, finally.
And I think you've got to wait a year, haven't they, for obviously...
They can't get rid of Truss through traditional fashions for a year, as I understand it. But I mean, I don't know what becomes unsustainable. If these polls don't turn sharpish, and conference is going to be absolutely unbelievable in Birmingham this weekend. I mean, truly unbelievable. I can't think of anything comparable to it, and she's going to have to give a keynote speech. The highlight of conference is supposed to be the leader's speech, and she's going to stand up on the stage with a 33-point deficit, and with a room full of people who understand that if this last poll is translated into an election result, there'll be 61 Conservative MPs. They could have their conference in a Wetherspoons. David is in Lutterworth. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
Part answer, part reflection. I think in favour of Starmer, I think it's all in context of everything else, right? We've gone from a stand-up comedian in Boris to a woman who uses silences as punctuation more than she should. That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
I think that's lifted the veil. I think some people have just suddenly realised
that's stylistic, though, that isn't it? And I know votes are won by quite shallow things as much as deep things. So Johnson could talk his way out of this, even, I think, probably, and blame it all on, I don't know, woke bankers or something like that. He has a plausibility about him, which is why he's wreaked so much havoc in every area of his life for 50-odd years. Truss just doesn't. You just don't. She doesn't. I mean, she can't lie her way out of trouble. She's awful.
No, I think so. And I think, talking of Boris, the Brexit horse, like it or hate it, you could probably guess my opinion. But it's done. So there's no winning strategy. You can't Brexit your way out of this by saying we're getting anything done, because it's a mess.
And it just scares the horses as well. I think deep in, I mean, increasingly everybody knows at some point we're going to have to find some sort of way back into the single market, but that is not something you campaign on or even stick in a manifesto at this point in the historical cycle, never mind the political cycle.
No, agreed. And then just quickly the reflection.
Yes.
I feel like this is the Conservatives' Corbyn moment. And also you can play this back to Gordon Brown as well. There was a credit crunch and then a guy who was elected through the membership, not the public. They blamed Labour for the credit crunch, which is a global phenomenon, but they got the kicking for it.
Got away with it, didn't they?
Yeah, we have a global phenomenon now, but we have a new leader elected by the membership and not the general public. But the Corbyn moment in particular, I say this is more reflection, is that the best candidate that the Tories put up in the two-horse race didn't win.
Yeah.
In the first round of voting, I don't know where Liz Truss came, but it wasn't the top
second.
3 or 4 from memory. No, it certainly wasn't second. So a minority of people have elected
a bizarre minority, or a very insulated minority of people, representative only of themselves, really.
Exactly, and it's at complete odds with the parliamentary party. She's got no allies. She's got no one in the cabinet. They're her allies, but there's so few of them because she wasn't the first choice for hardly anybody. So it's more reflection, really, of history repeating itself. I think it's going to be a really interesting collapse for the Tory party over the next couple of years. My biggest fear was Boris Johnson's reference to Greek. Was it Greek mythology or Roman? It was a Roman Empire.
Arnold Schwarzenegger as well, wasn't it?
My biggest fear is that he's going to come back on a chariot to save
and carry all the poor deluded saps with him next time that he carried with him last time and the time before that. Yeah.
Populism trumps all, and he'll be
effective populism. I mean, but which is awful for everybody ultimately, but great for the populist leader in the short term. And that, of course, is why all the usual suspects are desperate to undermine this Privileges Committee investigation, even to the extent of hiring their own lawyer to comment on something that is not actually law. The panic report, or whatever they called it, which was supposed to explain why the Privileges Committee's investigation into Boris Johnson's lies was somehow unfair or unsuitable, drew upon his legal knowledge rather than his understanding of parliamentary procedure. I mean, something so obvious, even for a lawyer of that level of repute, it was obviously bonkers. But still they try. That'll be next for the Daily Mail, I imagine, to start trying to resurrect that. The problem is, if you were Liz Truss and you had any influence whatsoever over the question of whether or not Boris Johnson gets his wings clipped and possibly his marching orders from Parliament for the rest of his life, what would you do? Because that's 2 callers now who've mentioned him. Mike still likes the cut of his jib, even though he's drawn towards Keir Starmer to vote. David reminds us that Johnson's waiting in the wings. And, of course, he is the epitome of opportunism, so no scenario too awful to stop him from thinking about himself. What would you do if you were Liz Truss? You had the power to either call off or continue the investigation into whether the man who lied to Parliament lied to Parliament. It's the best investigation ever, in a way. But hey-ho, by the time you've inhaled a few copies of the Daily Mail, I'm sure you'll be convinced that it's, is it a witch hunt? Are we supposed to call it a witch hunt? The problem with that analogy is that witches don't exist, but prime ministers who lie to Parliament do exist. How do we know that? Because we've had quite a few over the last few years, but only one who's been busted with his pants down for it, absolutely, completely. 10:58 is the time. I'm going to carry on with this after the news, actually. I think it merits further exam, not least because I'm getting... this will sound really bad now, so I know what you're thinking. Well, don't say it then, James. But I do like you to know exactly what's going on in the studio, let alone on the phone lines. The questions are even more, there you go, even more interesting. The answers are even more interesting than I expected. It's a credit to my colleagues, of course, who answer the phones, but the simplistic answers are not coming through. There is nothing simplistic about changing your political allegiance because you've effectively been bankrupted by the current government. But there's so much going on. There's nuance in a way that I sometimes think opinion poll-based conversations don't admit. But this is such a curious period of history and such an astonishing set of numbers that there are obviously millions and millions of things going on in millions and millions of minds. Some of it emotional, some of it political, some of it financial, some of it fiscal. It's not quite the same thing. Some of it, who knows what. And we'll continue to try to find out. Why do you think Labour are smashing it? It is 3 minutes after 11, and it is the sort of lead in opinion polls that you never see. And I can say that without fear of hyperbole, because the YouGov one certainly is the highest that the Labour Party has ever enjoyed since YouGov began. I don't even know off the top of my head what the second highest lead was, but I don't imagine it was very close to 33 points, leaving the Tories on about 21, I think, and therefore looking at electoral oblivion. It's highly unlikely to translate into an election result. Well, gosh, he says that because that's tradition. It's highly unlikely to translate into an election, into a general election result, because, we know how things always pan out. But I do wonder whether I believe that something very profound has been broken in this country in recent years, and maybe that means that all traditions are, at best, asleep and at worst, destroyed. You think about all the traditions that Boris Johnson destroyed, whether it was having an independent ethics advisor who concludes that a cabinet minister is a bully and therefore the cabinet minister has to resign. Johnson got rid of that. Having a committee to assess whether or not someone is a suitable candidate for a seat in the House of Lords. And then when the committee concludes that they're not, sending them away to rewrite it so that he can stick the son of a KGB spy in the House of Lords. Lying about there being no parties when he was in Downing Street during lockdown, and then saying, well, there were parties, but I didn't know about them, and then saying, well, there were parties, but I didn't go to them, and then saying, well, there were parties, but I did go to them, but I didn't realise they were parties, and then saying, well, there were parties, and I did go to them, and I've just been fined by the Metropolitan Police for breaking lockdown laws. Now, all of that, you could go on forever. The Owen Paterson scandal, where he sought to, with the connivance of Jacob Rees-Mogg, he sought to tear up the actual rule book on parliamentary standards because one of his top cronies had been busted for breaking it. And speaking of Jacob Rees-Mogg, he was sent to Balmoral to mislead the late Queen about the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. Let's get that word wrong. You could go on forever. And then, of course, one of the things, the soft principles, the ones that aren't written down, the ones that aren't explicit but are implicit that Boris Johnson broke, is the question of a resignation issue. There's no such thing in British politics at this point as a resignation issue. Even Chris Pincher tried to hang on, remember? Even Matt Hancock walked the plank. He wasn't pushed. He did it because he figured his own long-term career interests would be better served by a resignation than hanging on like a wounded animal. Under Boris Johnson's premiership, the notion of a resignation issue disappeared. Not forever. It can't be forever. We won't let it be forever. But under Boris Johnson's premiership, the notion of a resignation issue ceased to exist in government. That's objectively incredible. And you don't have to go back far to remember the last one. It was Amber Rudd under Theresa May. It was even Priti Patel under Theresa May after she lied about secret meetings with the foreign government. Behaviour that under Boris Johnson's leadership merited a promotion. Under Theresa May's, it merited a dismissal. So the notion of a resignation issue has disappeared for the time being. And I don't see it coming back anytime soon when the Chancellor of the Exchequer has already been responsible for the biggest self-imposed fiscal disaster in the history of these islands. Happily, as I explained at the top of the show, the intervention of the Bank of England has worked for now. The £64 billion that they've spent on buying up unlimited, essentially, gilts to save the economy from reaching such a point that pension funds would have been under threat has worked. We're back up to about $1.10 now or thereabouts. So it has worked, but it's temporary. It can't go on forever. They stopped doing that in about a week and a half, a few days, I think, before or after Parliament returns. And the message the Bank of England is sending to politicians is clear. Right, we'll keep this afloat We'll keep the pound afloat after you effectively sank it and we've resurrected it. We'll keep the pound afloat until you lot are back at work, and then it's on you. It's not. It won't be a continuing policy from the Bank of England. So in Idiot's Corner today, you'll have people claiming that because the pound is performing a lot better now against the dollar than it was in the immediate aftermath of Kwasi Kwarteng's speech, it's proof that everything has been exaggerated. I mean, even after 6 years of dealing with Brexiters, I still marvel at the level of idiocy, deliberate stupidity deployed by these people. Oh, well, the pound's doing well now. Oh, I bet you're not going to mention that. I opened the show with it, you clown. And I opened the show with it because it's a temporary reprieve from the impact of the budget. The bank, the central bank, the independent central bank intervened in an unprecedented fashion to stop the pound from crashing through the floor and taking pension funds with it. Full stop. New paragraph. It's a temporary measure, and when it ceases to apply, we're staring it in the face again. Goodness me, how stupid do you have to be not to understand that when it's staring you in the face? Actually, that's unfair. I withdraw that, because we're currently governed by a Prime Minister too stupid to understand the energy cap that she herself has introduced, as she demonstrated live on the radio yesterday. Almost answering my own question here. Why is the Labour Party doing so well? What has happened in the last week to make you look anew at the political landscape, to make you shrug off, shed lifetimes of loyalties and think, yeah, do you know what, Sir Keir Starmer and his Labour Party, it's got to be them now. We can't carry on. Or maybe you haven't. I mean, if you're one of the 21%, if you're one of the people with your scarf, well, I know what you're doing this morning. You're spouting nonsense about the pound and the dollar. I don't think it would be fair to inflict that on my listeners. But if you've got something vaguely intelligent to say about why you're still loyal to Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, then, I mean, unless you're ringing from Tufton Street, I'd be delighted to put you on the radio. 9 minutes after 11 is the time. Lee is in Watford. Lee, sorry to keep you for so long. What would you like to say?
That's right, James. I think you're sort of nailing it. Lovely to see you starting calm and then getting back to your normal self.
You spotted it, did you, as well? I know, it's ridiculous. It never lasts, does it? It never lasts. I'll tell you what it is, Lee. It's events, dear boy. Events, isn't it?
Exactly. I'm going to flatter you a bit here. I think you probably own 1 or 2% of the swing personally. No, honestly, I sent your summary of the Truss interviews to 400 contacts, and they all loved it, right? And these are hardcore Tory, kind of city boys, right? So, look, they get it. You're absolutely spot on with the 11th of October, right? And the reason for the swing, right? The reason everyone ignores Patterson, Pincher, Boris, parties, whatever. You know why?
Go on.
It didn't financially impact them.
Yeah.
This is financially impacting them. When you come after house prices and pensions, it's not even really about the mortgage rates, right? Because, a lot of Conservative voters will say, yeah, my niece just has got to pay 8% on a new purchase. That's not personal to them. Pension and house price is, right? Yes. So the LDI step in by the Bank of England, which you're absolutely right to say is a huge issue on the 11th of October. Look,
that's when it expires, is it? The 11th of October?
Yeah, well, the 11th of October is the Friday. It stops on the Monday. What that means is the shorts go back on gilts on Friday because they know it's ending on the Monday. Right. So, look, I know a fair few guys in the city, kind of got a few businesses there.
Sure.
Yeah, what they're planning on is the Bank of England stepping away from that on the 11th of October. What then happens is more pressure on the LDI pension market, right? And so when you come after people's pensions and house prices, that's sacrament for Conservative voters.
Of course it is.
Yeah, that's the stuff you don't touch, and that's the stuff they touched incredibly hard because, mate, I'll give you a technical if you really want a bit of education.
Take it easy, though. Speak slowly.
Yeah. Okay, there's 64 billion, right, that the Bank of England spent on the first day.
Yes.
That was gone by 9:03 a.m.
Wow.
Right. What that means, right, is the support, that we're going to prop up pension funds. It's used up, i.e. the demand is so big, to sell gilts to the Bank of England that it's gone by 9 a.m. Yeah, that is it's propping up, but it's barely propping it up, right?
Yeah. But you say barely. I mean, the alternative is inconceivable almost. So, I mean, it has propped it up, but...
Yeah. Look, it's propped up gilt, right? I mean, but gilt yields flexed again, right? Because now you've got the ABR that's going to come out with some horrendous kind of reporting, obviously, this week. Yeah, there's going to be more pressure on gilts because the funding isn't in place. So this is a ticking time bomb for these people now. Right?
And what the bank did was press pause.
Yeah,
they didn't cut the wire like at the end of a Bond film. They just managed to get the clock to stop ticking for a couple of weeks.
Exactly, and that's why. Look, I know you don't. I'm not a fan of question time, but you look at that audience, which was 70% Conservative voters last night when they went silent. They're coming after my house and they're coming after my pension, right? And
by accident, though, Lee.
Well, it's kind of by design. If you look at Tufton Street, right, it is by design because they're devaluing sterling assets, right? There's a lot more stuff. There is a lot of nuance in this, and the nuance is Tufton Street and the IEA and the CPS.
But they're not even denying it now. So one of them tweeted yesterday, I think George Monbiot tweeted yesterday an article saying Liz Truss has been completely taken over by the think tanks, and one of the IEA ghouls tweeted, yes, she has.
Yeah, they've won, mate. They're in power. Look, the
can't be enjoying it much, Lee. It's not. I mean, it's a bit like Brexit, isn't it? I mean, this is quite a weird thing to be doing a lap of honour over.
Oh, no, it's nuts, right? I mean, these people are proper crazies. I mean, the FT did a flash poll of like 300 political analysts today. They're putting this Tory government at 9.4 on the 0 to 10 left to right wing scale.
This is on economics, the economic far right.
Yeah, the economic side of it, right? So what they're saying is they're right of Bolsonaro.
Yes,
right?
and the AFD and the Brothers of Italy. We're to the right of way to the right of old Orban in Hungary. Only on economics, but you know that we are the most economically right wing major party in the developed world.
Yeah, that's 61 countries, 350 political analysts.
I was saving that up for the second half of the programme. I've got that up in front of me at the moment. I can't believe you've shot my fox like that. It's unbelievable.
I'm sorry about that. But you can see right wing's fine when it's about woke and channel crossings and whatever, right? If it comes for your house price, people read 10%, pension down 9%. Yeah, that's real stuff for these people. Even cult members struggle with that.
Of course they do, because they don't want to hand their house over to Jim Jones. What about the politics? I mean, it is the politics. You can't separate it. So this is, and I like your analysis. It's a little bit more cynical. It's not about I'm worried about other people suffering, or even I'm worried about me suffering or my family suffering. It is simply saying I'm all right, Jack, and that has influenced my politics for most of my adult life. And suddenly I'm worried that I'm not going to be. So I'm going to take a chunk out of the people in charge. But talk to me briefly about Starmer, because there wouldn't be an exodus of people from the Tories to the Labour Party if Jeremy Corbyn was still there.
No, absolutely, and that's why it's safe to go the other way, right? It's safe to protect yourself because, frankly, look, he is being boring. He's got.
I had to dump that. You were doing so well. I just had to dump your rude word. So go back to he's a bit boring and childcare, and don't use that word again.
Steady. I'm sorry, but he's steady. He's calm. He's normal. Right, you've got Rachel Reeves, who looks like an adult. You've got a decent education shadow secretary. She was doing a great job last night.
Bridget Phillips.
Yeah, what you've got is normal people, right? And then you put like who's the guy, the chairman, right? And he was spouting something this morning. Yeah, Jack Barry, right? You put these people on TV. And you put them on the radio, and they just don't look like normal people.
Well, that's been true for a while, but Johnson provided an awful lot of cover, didn't it, by being almost performatively not normal, extraordinarily not normal. And he covered up the Dorieses and the Rees-Moggs and the rest of it, but that camouflage has gone now. I'm late for the break, Lee, so I need to know a bit about your own politics, if you don't mind. I could take some guesses, but give me the short version.
Yeah, lifelong Thatcherite, Young Conservative chair under Margaret Thatcher.
What, the National Young Conservative? Chair of the National Young Conservatives?
Yeah. So I was right there at the centre, party conferences, everything, right? Funding, donor, right up until, Johnson, right?
Wow.
I was a May supporter, everything else, right? Trying to get a soft Brexit done.
Yeah.
I just walked away from the party when they did Johnson, right? This is off the back of Brexit and Johnson and everything else.
Of course it is.
But what it did is it empowered Tufton Street. That's what happened.
Flipping lefties, former chairs of the Young Conservatives. Could you put a cross in Labour's box in 2024?
100% committed. We are funding. We've got 400 local business guys around the southeast. We're funding number 2 to a Tory is our badge on LinkedIn, not on Twitter.
That's what it's
called.
Number 2 to a Tory.
Number two to a Tory. Fund them, support them, help them. These people are not Conservatives.
Wow, some calls today, Lee, and yours is right up there. Many thanks. Also for the education. I'm not going to lie. There's some stuff there I didn't fully understand before you started speaking, and I understand it better now, if not necessarily fully. 11:17 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. Continuing this, because every answer has been different. I don't know how it works for you when the phones are buzzing, but the point at which I think even when there's loads of people waiting to speak, it might be time to move on, is when we hit a sort of seam of consensus. Sometimes the consensus itself can be significant. Crikey, everybody agrees about this. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's absolutely fascinating. But when you're getting lots and lots of different answers to the same question, the interest, for me at least, the interest level stays the same. Crikey, I hadn't thought of that. And Lee came in late in the game, an hour and a quarter into the conversation, to remind us that self-interest will be driving an awful lot of very traditional Tory defections from Tory to Labour. In fact, a pal of mine has been in touch today to say, very simply, my father-in-law, a lifelong working-class Tory, thought they would always be the party to look after his money. After the last week and after seeing Starmer's speech, he says he will vote Labour for the first time. It's a combination of the Tories trashing their own reputation in one fell swoop. It is Gerard Ratner level trashing of reputation in one fell swoop stuff, this, and being impressed by Starmer's speech. I was speechless when I was told. I genuinely didn't think it was possible. And that's from a pal who's listening, not from my inbox. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. There's one phone line free if you want to grab it, 0345 606 0973. Why so big, this swing to Labour, and why now? And the other interesting thing about this conversation, well, there's millions of interesting things about these conversations, but the other, for me, immediately significant thing is the sense of sustenance. This does not sound like a flash in the pan. This does not sound like a temporarily inflated balloon. This sounds like a seismic shift in both personal and public politics. And it won't be permanent. Nothing ever is, as we are constantly reminded in politics around the world. But it feels like it's got bottom. It's got heft. It's got, depth. Let's talk to Boris now. No, not that one. In Luxembourg. Boris, what would you like to say?
Hello, how are you doing? Best greetings from the London School of Economics, where I think you also spent some time.
I did indeed.
But
Thank you.
Really, I'm really calling up from the centre of Europe here, from Luxembourg, and looking at the UK, we are shaking our heads what's going on. One thing that I've not yet read in the newspapers about, not in the Financial Times, not in the Economist,
yes,
is the risks we are taking by taking on all this government bond onto the Bank of England's balance sheet. Let's just remember that we've had for the last years tremendous quantitative easing policies, so they must be sitting on hundreds of billions of debt already. If interest rates were to go up eventually, all of these positions that they have on their balance sheet will have to be valued downwards. And this is maybe why they're so reluctant of putting up the interest rates and prefer to continue doubling up by continue buying gilts, as they've done this week. Whether this is going to get resolved in a peaceful way, I don't know. But I'm very, very concerned about where the markets are heading with this.
Can you conceive of circumstances? What do you mean when you use the word peaceful, Boris?
Well, peaceful in terms of we're not going to have an absolute meltdown in the markets again like we had in 2007, 2008.
Right.
This is just continuously doubling up on a position that we've done with quantitative easing to solve a problem. But remember, these papers that the government is essentially selling to the central banks, in this case to the Bank of England.
These are the gilts themselves.
The gilts,
yes.
Correct. They're not going away. They are positions that the Bank of England holds on its balance sheet. And because it is a central bank, it doesn't have to market them like other institutions, commercial banks will have to do.
Yes.
But eventually, this thing has to blow up. It's not only an issue for the UK, it's an issue for some of the other countries, but the UK, with the policies that they have had this week, has just doubled down again. And I don't understand why the media has not picked this up.
Well, we're doing our best, Boris. Give me a break, will you? And there are some corners of the media that are still flying distraction. You know, we've got some quotes, commentators, end quotes, claiming that we've just got to hold our nerve and they've absolutely done the right thing. Is there the vaguest possibility that they're right?
That they're right about what? That we can somehow survive this without a major meltdown in the market?
No, more than that. They're claiming that this is absolutely the right path to be following and all that they have to do is hold their nerve.
Well, they've been continuing doing quantitative easing and the likes for the last 5-6 years, but it doesn't make the problem go away. We have a problem that our productivity in the Western world is going down.
Yes.
Locking people up during COVID doesn't help your productivity.
No.
And at the same time, we've been propping in money, whether it's in COVID or now through the supporting for the heating bills, we are putting in money in the system. Go back to your basic inflation rules. Inflation is too much money chasing too little goods and services. If we reduce productivity, then we have less goods and services. And if we put in money, then we are increasing inflation. It's as simple as that. And you can delay it by quantitative easing, and you can delay it a little bit by putting these gilts onto the balance sheet of the Bank of England. But at the end of the day, we'll have to bite the bullet.
How contagious is it then? Because, everyone is facing similar issues, but only the UK has decided to address the flames with petrol. How contagious do these decisions become for you in Luxembourg, for example? I sense you're in the sector, are you, Boris? You're in banking, or?
I'm in banking. I was 25 years in fund management, asset management, as well as on the investment banking side.
Right.
I'm retired now. But I'm looking this with extreme void in terms of where people should be putting their money in order to be safe.
How contagious will it be? How contagious will this British condition be for the rest of the world or for the rest of Europe?
The UK, of course, is still a major financial center, yes. So that is worrying. It is. Think back maybe into the mid of the 90s when you think about the financial crisis in Asia, where Thailand was the most exposed country, and when Thailand went down, pretty quickly the other dominoes fell, Indonesia, Korea, and we had a real mess behind that, which I think is why the IMF is also coming in and looking at the UK and saying, what you've just done last week is a major doubling up on a risk that we already have. So we just hope that the UK doesn't become another Thailand case.
Grief. This is going to sound like a very silly question, but you'll understand why, and it's my final one, I promise. You'll understand why I ask you. What's the best case scenario right now?
The best case scenario is, I think, that we model through, that we accept some of the inflation that we have, that we do not continue to meddle up, and that, if you really want to have my best case scenario is, that we solve the pressures that we have, the macro pressures that we have, including the issues in Russia.
Yes.
Get the interest rates slightly up, make fuel drop, and if you
but
say
these are international answers. I was thinking a little bit more domestically, as in terms of the without significant change to any of the variables, and with a government in London who seem to be, I'm told the OBR has just left 10 Downing Street after 45 minutes, which doesn't augur well for a deep and meaningful conversation, or indeed a change of course. If the government in the UK stays on this course, what is the best case scenario for the United Kingdom?
I think the best case scenario for the United Kingdom is to quickly have a change of government, a government that starts thinking about the working class people in any country spend their money the wisest.
Yeah.
This is an economic basic concept. It's diminishing rate of returns. If you give the purchasing power to the working class and the masses of the people, you will have a more effective working industry than doing this trickle-down nonsense where you give money to people who are already extremely wealthy, hope that this thing trickles down somehow, which it never does, because the people at the top are not very effective in investing their own money and spending it productively. Trickle-down has been proven to be total nonsense. What we need to do is flow up. Working class people spend their money better. Give more.
They also spend it all, don't they? I know that's the point you're making.
Absolutely.
There it is. Oh boy.
But you will not get there with a Tory government, I think, unfortunately.
No.
Sound politics will be with another party. How you get there politically, good luck for the next 2 years.
Thank you, Boris. I enjoyed that a lot. I hope you'll call me again, because I suspect, I think we both know that these issues are not going anywhere. There you go, a 25-year veteran of the markets, the world of banking, just providing a very cool and clear analysis of how we look from where they are. But remember, Billy Bunch of Numbers with his bulldog avatar is pointing out that Germany also has inflation as well at the moment, and therefore, we're something, Brexit, something. Come on, lads. What's it going to take for you just to realise you've been mugged? You've been mugged for 6 years, and it's about to get worse. And not only have you been mugged, it's contagious. So everyone who knew this was coming gets mugged now as well because of your idiocy and the leadership of your political heroes. And we're asking why Keir Starmer's poll numbers have gone so bonkers. Holly Harris is here now with the headlines. Have you been using the 784 breathing method or the 478? It's incredibly helpful if you need to keep calm. You empty your lungs, right? You breathe in through your nose for 7, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then you hold it for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you breathe out through your mouth in 4. You like whoosh it out in 4. I often do that during the news at past. It's very helpful if you're struggling with sleep as well. 478 they call it. 11:35 is the time. Back to why has Keir Starmer this week just run ahead in the polls on a scale that you have literally never seen before? Robert's in Exeter. Robert, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm very calm now. Thank you for that.
Did you do it, honestly, or are you just...
No, I actually did, yes.
It works, doesn't it?
And your producer spoke to me halfay through, so I had to exhale quickly.
You need to do it 4 times minimum for maximum effect, but on we go.
I will, I promise.
Good man.
Something Lee said, your caller before last, actually was really key, but it may not have been the bit that he realised.
Go on.
It was when he said that he sent the clip of you and your latest, the Truss takedown from the BBC interviews to 400 of his friends.
Yes.
So I work in marketing, and you're always looking when you're campaigning or when you're marketing a product for attribution. So to work out when something's working and when something isn't working, so you can trace it back and see where you spend your money, you increase your advertising in that area.
Got it.
But so often you can't find out. You don't really know. Because something happens which just makes something take off.
Yes.
So you always hope it's something you've done. So Labour's campaign team would be desperate for it to be Starmer's speech. They would have been planning that and where that's going to go and the clips are going to take and how they're going to send it out and where it's going to go to.
Yeah.
But in the end, it can be something unquantifiable, like Liz Truss being interviewed by BBC Norfolk.
Of course it can.
And that's enough to start tipping stuff. And because of the way in which we're so interconnected and because of the way in which word of mouth is so important, that when those key people, like that guy's father-in-law, who texted in and said, you know what, I'm going Labour now, he may well have a huge network of people. And the more, and it's the Mexican wave effect. You go to Wembley and you're advertised by Nike and you're advertised by Heineken. And you don't buy any of those things, but everybody does the Mexican way. And there's something about the power of when something starts to get momentum, when the market is ready for that product, and you see people buying it, and you see people using it, and you see people enjoying it, then you think, well, I want in. And I think it doesn't take much now for that to happen politically, to get this kind of surge that can happen really, really quickly. And that's what I think we're seeing now.
That's absolutely fascinating. And it reminds us that politics isn't a science, is it?
Exactly. And marketing isn't either. And much as we wish it was, because it costs an awful lot of money, and there's a huge amount of analytics, and billions goes to Google and to Facebook, it can be something like people sharing funny content about the Prime Minister on Radio Lancashire, which is enough to...
And we don't know that that's what it was this week, which is the point that you're making. Although the fact that he has sent that to 400 contacts with a mission, he's on a mission as well. And so you imagine if 1,000 other people have done that, suddenly it's with 400,000 serious city types, and it is moving, it's nudging needles.
Now, obviously, then what does happen is that if people then think, right, you know what, I am now in the market to buy a product which is something different. That's then when you may go and check out to see what Starmer said. Actually, he seems okay. I'm no longer scared. I think I want a bit of that. But often, and this is what Google's figures tell you, that when you decide to buy a product, you do 13 different searches before you actually make that purchase.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
So people are likely, therefore, and even if they don't know it, to have got this sense that Labour is the future from a bit of WhatsApp, a couple of conversations, a TV news bulletin, something from YouTube, And that's what it takes. So you can never know exactly where it has happened or what that one moment might be, but it will be a culmination.
And how do you measure stickability? How do you know whether it's... Well, I mean, you don't, do you? But how do you know whether it's permanent or not?
Well, politically, it's harder, isn't it? This is what the polling will do. This is what the polling will tell you over the next few. That
will tell us, but so you don't know until you actually do the research. It seems pretty sticky, this, to me. I mean, certainly, we're an hour and 40 minutes into the programme, and it's been absolutely first class, and you right up there with the best contributors. In fact, there hasn't been a duff call, has there? There hasn't been a single.
I think the sort of tipping point for me, if I was I'm not a political marketeer, although sure. a lot of things are quite similar.
Same skills.
But if you've got people saying, I can't believe that my father-in-law has now said he's willing to vote Labour. What's it going to? And if they're not willing to, is going to vote Labour, is determined to vote Labour,
and is telling people that he's going to vote Labour. So there's 4 or 5 stages on that path, isn't there? There's thinking about it, there's planning to do it, there's doing it but not telling anyone, and then there's telling everyone, even the people who've been arguing for 20 years about politics, that actually, this time you're right, I'm going the other way.
And he has to now be targeted by the Conservative Party to make him not want to do that. Now, the best they might be hoping for now is that he's going to abstain. But people who the older they get, the more likely they are to vote. But I'm also old enough to remember the lead up to the 97 election and what happened between 92 and 97, and it feels very similar to me, and that people shifted from a begrudging acceptance that government was probably over, and then into, actually, Blair seems okay, Labour seem okay, to actively wanting to vote for the Labour Party.
That's the crucial difference.
That's when you get the turnout shift, and that's when you get the 170, 200 seat majorities, when there was an active desire, as opposed to a begrudging acceptance. I think that's the shift that we've seen in the past week, which is why that 44% Labour was showing, which wasn't really moving the needle, as you would say, has suddenly flipped over because it's actually gone into enthusiasm rather than begrudging. Well, they probably seem better than this lot.
Yes, I mean that is a beautiful analysis, and it leaves an awful lot yet to be discovered, which is the nature of the whole game, isn't it? The nature of the whole beast. But that idea of something that you can't measure, or you can spend £1 million on advertising, and then suddenly you accidentally start making clips that go viral and you end up on the front page of the New York Times. Theo, that would be great, wouldn't it, if that happened to someone? So it doesn't matter how many faces you stick on the side of a bus, you get yourself in a news story on the front of the New York Times because your clips go so viral. It's exactly what he's talking about. No one plans that kind of thing. It just comes out of nowhere and takes everybody by surprise. A lot of love coming in for the calibre, the quality of the calls today. I thank you for that, Robert. Thankfully, we've still got some idiots texting. Here's someone calls himself SA Mike. He says the 33% is probably an outlier. Wait for a week. Starmer is not electable. Yeah, it is an outlier, mate, because the other polls that have come in the last 24 hours have a 21-point lead for Labour, a 19-point lead for Labour, a 20-point lead for Labour, and a 17-point lead for Labour. The 17-point lead for Labour being the highest ever lead recorded by that particular polling company, Redfield Wilton. So you hang in there. Should we do you after the break or before?
Don't mind. You choose.
Just do you after. I'll squeeze in Ian in Farnham. He's been on hold for ages.
Okay.
You can't just waltz in here like Phil and Holly, thinking that you can push Ian out of the way. Go straight to the front of the queue. Ian, what would you like to say?
Well, a lot to say, but a fantastic discussion. And firstly, I'm on that journey. I'm a Conservative voter. I have been my whole life and had a very, by most barometers, I suppose, a successful career.
Yeah.
Would have been in that bracket of high earners. And I think I was just staggered last Friday, frankly. I mean, the idea you would have reduced my tax burden at this point is just perverse. I mean,
and followed up today by suggestions that they might actually not put benefits up in line with inflation, which they had previously pledged to do. So giving money to people like you and me, effectively, and giving more to you and me and giving less to the poorest people in the country.
All it does is create more security for people like us and gives us ability to save more and just weather storms more and all the rest of it. And things like yesterday I had I got my energy bill came through and it had this 66 quid off it, right? And I was like, oh, okay. And it's like £400 blanket energy thing. I mean, there's some additional targeting and everything, but why do it in the first place? Just target it.
The answer was that means testing it or targeting it would have been too hard. And I mean, I guess in the short term, we just have to take their word for that. don't we? But a windfall tax would have been another way of doing it, wouldn't it? Or another policy completely, which they've chosen to completely reject.
You're telling me in a data-rich society we can't target things in the right way?
No, Ian, I'm telling you what they said. It's a very different thing. I know.
What I'd say, the one thing I really want to say about this is optics, right?
Go on.
I mean, I've companies, they haven't got a clue about optics. I mean, this government, I've never seen anything like it. They've shot themselves in the foot, I mean, multiple times.
Both feet.
They don't understand anything about optics. I mean, the point is, we've all done it. We've all driven down the motorway the wrong way. We got to the next petrol station and realised we should have been going east rather than west. Well,
not quite the wrong way. Sorry, I misunderstood you there. You don't mean driving into the traffic.
No. As in I've driven down like the M4.
You've gone on the wrong bit. You've gone off the wrong exit on the roundabout. Yeah.
The point is, you feel a damn sight more silly if you tell the person when you get to Bristol, you go, actually, I'm actually in London now, by the way.
This was the plan all along. And not only was this the plan all along, but this is not London. This is not Bristol.
This is Bristol.
This is London.
Where I meant to be. Right?
That's what it's like.
I could have turned around 100 miles ago and gone the right direction, but I decided not to. And I'll just tell you this is Bristol anyway.
The lady's not for turning. Thank you for making me laugh as well. I need it. Also, I've got to do a correction. I got my plumbing breathing advice wrong, Theo. Can you believe it? 4, 7, 8. It's in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. I mean, it all works, all of this breathing type, but you're supposed to be flooding yourself with oxygen.
Someone's going faint under the table.
Cutting down, so it helps with anxiety. Could you imagine if there's people dropping like flies all across the country at the moment? In for 4, hold for 7.
No, we can't. The emergency tape.
That's why you're talking.
You're right, okay.
It's all good. And then out for 8 with pursed lips. 11:49 is the time. Sam's in Bedfordshire. I've been a Conservative campaign manager for parliamentary and local elections since 2016. I've stood for election twice myself. I've held senior roles within the Regional Voluntary Party. I started to fall out of love with the party during the last few months of Boris's tenure. Now, with the latest catastrophe orchestrated by Liz Truss, I have resigned my membership of the party and will likely vote Liberal Democrat in next year's locals unless things change dramatically. Thank you, Sam. Do you know what this could be? Theo Usher.
What's it? Could be.
Judging by the calls today and these opinion polls, we might be witnessing the end of the footballification period of British politics.
Do you think?
I do.
Why do you think that?
Because people are finding it easier, to their own surprise, much easier than they ever thought it would be, to take their scarves off, to change their minds.
Where's Sam from?
Bedfordshire.
That's a target seat. If it's Nadine Dorries, the former Culture Secretary seat.
Never heard of her. Because
she was going to go up to the House of Lords and potentially there was going to be a by-election. Lib Dems were after that one. So interesting that Sam has said what he said.
To what do we owe this pleasure? I didn't summon you.
Because the Office for Budget Responsibility, senior head honchos there, have just been having a meeting, including Richard Hughes with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. And I should just point you back before we go into the contents of the meeting and what's come out of it. Actually, it was Rachel Venables got the letter yesterday evening.
Big scoop for Rachel. Broke it on the Andrew Marr show.
I know.
What's he got that I haven't?
Well, the letter was from the OBR to Ian Blackford, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, and it said the following: "We offered at the time to update that forecast to take account of subsequent data and to reflect the economic and fiscal impact of any policies the government announced in time for it to be published alongside the fiscal event planned for later this month."
Right.
In the event, we are not commissioned to produce an updated forecast alongside the Chancellor's growth plan on 23rd of September, although we would have been in the position to do so to a standard that satisfied the legal requirements of the Charter for Budget Responsibility enacted by Parliament. So whilst we have full autonomy over the content of the economic and fiscal forecast and a legal obligation to publish 2 forecasts in each financial year, the Charter states that it is for the Chancellor to decide the date of publication for our forecast, given that it would normally coincide with the publication of policy announcements. So in short, we could have actually fulfilled what the Chancellor was asking for us and to provide the contents of the forecast.
Is this partly in response to Rachel's scoop?
No, this was Rachel's scoop.
Oh,
this was the letter.
But the fact that they've had the meeting today, was that announced before or after?
It was announced. I think it was slightly before, but it may have been after. But anyway, they've gone in.
So we knew, we suspected, or we even knew this was the case. But Rachel got hold via the SNP of conclusive proof that the OBR was willing and ready to provide
and
precisely,
could do it.
But willing and ready to provide precisely the sort of analysis that Kwasi Kwarteng deliberately eschewed.
Yes. So then the OBR had this meeting this morning with the Prime Minister. Richard Hughes went in, and afterwards the OBR published a short statement which said, and this is relating to the November the 23rd medium fiscal term statement. Because it's a fiscal statement, there had been some speculation that the government would try and repeat the trick of September the 23rd and not publish any forecasts or scrutiny from the OBR. However, things have changed. The OBR's Budget Responsibility Committee met with the Prime Minister and Chancellor this morning. We discussed the economic and fiscal outlook and the forecast we are preparing for the Chancellor's medium-term fiscal plan. We will deliver the first iteration of that forecast to the Chancellor on Friday, the 7th of October, next Friday, and we'll set out the full timetable up to 23rd of November next week. The forecast will, as always, be based on our independent judgment about economic and fiscal prospects and the impact of the government's policies.
So that will absorb last Friday as well, because that has to be part of any forecast for November.
And the Prime Minister and Chancellor seems to have caved in this morning, saying the Treasury's just released a statement to read out of the meeting, saying that they discussed the process for the upcoming and economic fiscal forecast, which will be published on 23rd of November, and the economic and fiscal outlook. They agreed, as is usual, to work closely together throughout the forecast period process and beyond. The Prime Minister and Chancellor reaffirmed their commitment to the independent OBR and made clear they value
They reaffirm a commitment that they didn't have on Friday.
Yes.
Can you do that? I mean, just verbally,
I think it's a little bit. I think it's a little bit. It's a little bit like saying if you cheat on your partner, then you go back and you do one of those. You reaffirm your marriage.
I like
vows.
it. Yeah, good call. Good call.
It's like
have
that.
either of them mentioned the bank yet? Because this, I'm finding incredible that neither Kwarteng nor Truss have mentioned the £64 billion intervention from the Bank of England, which has actually temporarily steadied the pound. How can they? I mean, it is a bit like being a football manager and not mentioning the FA Cup, isn't it? But that's not a very good analogy, and you set the bar quite high there with your cheating partner. Let me think again. It's a bit like being on the Titanic and not mentioning the ice, but not mentioning the lifeboat.
Well, I think their reasoning would be that they're having to spend 150 billion plus trying to ensure that the energy market doesn't collapse completely because people have no hope of paying their energy bills. But actually, it's only 65 billion when you compare it to that 155 billion plus that you're spending on bailing out the market so all of our pensions don't topple over.
Except it was from the Bank of England reserves rather than from the Treasury. So they should simply, if they're talking about steadying the ship or talking about seeing it through, how can they say this is the right policy while not acknowledging that it's a policy the negative impact of which has been assuaged by a completely unprecedented intervention by the Bank of England after a completely unprecedented warning from the IMF?
Yes. On the plus side...
Really? Go on, then.
No. you didn't know what that caller did to
Bird
you.
and fortune, this, isn't it? It's gone. But well, of course, what you have to remember is that people like being poor.
Number 10 are making the point.
Yeah.
They made the point to me this morning on via WhatsApp that, the pound has crept back up to where it was, just shy of where it was before it collapsed against the dollar in the Asian markets through the early hours of Monday.
Yes. And because of what the Bank of England has done. How can the government not mention that? I know you're trying hard to imagine what they might say if they had the audacity to speak to anybody, and we saw what happened yesterday when Liz Truss pokes her head above the parapet. She gets her eyebrows singed by everybody from Bristol to Nottingham. But there is no rationale for this except they just are pretending it didn't happen.
No, they're sticking with the line that they're going to see this policy through for the moment. But given where the polling numbers are that you were reading out, and the fact that it remains to be seen whether they can actually ride this one out, because what's the
alternative to riding it out? Because you can't
reverse the policy.
Oh, just that? You don't mean ride over the sunset? Just very briefly while you're here, because Theo is, of course, LBC's political editor. You get a year's grace, do you, on votes of no confidence?
Yes.
So in what circumstances could she be prized out of Downing Street by her own party? None.
Well, there are circumstances. I mean, if there is, of course, the possibility that she can't get her budget through. And if she can't get her budget through, because it's voted down by, and you're then into supply and confidence.
If Tories are desperate for a change of leadership before a year has passed, they would do that.
Yes, quite possibly.
When was the last time that happened?
I'd need to check.
Yeah, so would I. I'm just trying to drag
last time a budget didn't pass.
Yeah. I don't know. But I mean, and it wouldn't have to be a budget. It could be any serious piece of legislation that was defeated, but a budget would be
Well,
turned.
no. You do a Queen's speech, or King's speech now, of course. So you do a King's speech.
It's a good film.
You do a King's speech, and because that sets out the government's legislative programme, and any piece of legislation, you remember the Brexit legislation was turned into a confidence issue by Boris Johnson in September 19.
So
you can make a Prime Minister can make a particular vote a confidence issue if they choose to do so.
Thank you. I'm going to talk to Sue. I need a soothing voice. Sue, I hope you've got a soothing voice there in Wigston.
Well, I'll do my best, James.
Oh, that's nice, Sue.
Thank you. Is it nice? Well, that's very
lovely.
kind of you
What's on your mind?
Thank you. Well, it's this business about how Keir Starmer is suddenly becoming, if you like, flavour of the month. Well, I mean, he is a good man. I've always liked him, and I've tried to watch him whenever he's on. The trouble is, he doesn't get, or hitherto hasn't had so much coverage. And I know that friends of mine and acquaintances said, well, he doesn't say anything, he doesn't do anything, you never see him, you never hear him. And I think, well, that's so unfair. That's simply because the papers don't report him, TV doesn't show him.
Yes.
But this week, of course, he's had extensive coverage because of that wonderful speech he did, which was remarkable, except it did say a lot of what he has been saying all along.
You're in the same boat as me, I think, and of thinking, when are other people going to see what I can see?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that has helped. And just alluding back to an earlier caller who was in marketing, I think that has been certainly helpful to the trigger, whatever it is, that's tipped Keir over the edge to the sunny uplands, if you like, to make people realise what a great man he can be, and let's hope that he does actually win the next election, whenever that might be. Let's hope it's sooner rather than later. I am not a Labour voter. I am a Lib Dem voter. But Labour will be getting my vote next time.
And that's a constituency-based decision. That's a constituency-based decision, isn't it, I think?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in a firm Conservative constituency here in Leicestershire, and the county is a Conservative constituency. My local one is Lib Dem, and they're great locally. Wouldn't change that. But nationally, I'm stuck in a blue zone, if you like. But I will certainly be voting Labour next time, and to help Keir Starmer all that I can.
And that is a common contribution. This man, go on, because
I just think he's doing all the right things. He's heading in the right direction, and we need to do something. We need to turn a sharp right angle.
We can't go on like this, I think it sums it up, Sue. And do you know, bizarrely, I've just realised, a bit of a hands-up moment, may I call part, I didn't think there would ever be a conversation where the bulk of callers were talking about the particular personal appeal of Sir Keir Starmer. I thought he was going to be like a good, almost a John Majory type leader, but he's achieved something I didn't think he would achieve. Certainly not a year ago, maybe 6 months ago. I began, because I interviewed him myself at great length and saw, got the measure of him a bit, and much to my pleasant surprise. But that is 2 hours of radio there, where Keir Starmer's personal electoral appeal has been mentioned by almost every caller from every corner of the political landscape, and that is absolutely fascinating. 12:01 is the time. It's 5 minutes after 12. Listen, I'm carrying on with it because there's just an unending queue of people waiting to. Well, not an unending queue of people. Otherwise, Holly and Phil would be pushing it. No, I'll stop doing that joke now, because I think they've been I do actually think they've been very unfairly treated, and I can't believe that it's still being talked about this week, so far after the event. So it's such an obvious joke, such an easy joke, and it's quite a good joke, but it's not a fair joke. So don't let me do that one again, Keith, all right? Seriously, keep your finger over the dump button if I even go near it. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, long queues. The number of people still keen to talk about this, and working on the presumption that people have got things to say that we haven't already heard. So why... It's weird, that, isn't it? This real kind of... coin, two sides of a coin. So I would have made a mistake a few years ago when I was a bit wetter behind the ears on this, of saying, what do you think's going on here? Is Starmer winning it? Or actually, I think I may have made this mistake last week, so I can hardly claim that I've suddenly I've been on a long journey of maturity. Is Starmer winning it, or are the Tories losing it? It's never going to be one or the other, is it? It's going to be 50-50 or 52-48. Is Starmer winning it? Because the Tories could be as bad as they are now, but if you had someone absolutely appalling leading the Labour Party, then people would be describing themselves as politically homeless at the moment, rather than piling in unprecedented numbers to supporting the Labour Party. Under Sir Keir Starmer, which has, again, perhaps surprisingly, proved to be a very key element of this entire conversation. It is not just a sort of any port in the storm move. It is an attraction to what Sir Keir Starmer has done and become, which 6 months ago I hoped would happen, but didn't necessarily believe, if I'm honest with you. I am... Actually, only struck me 10 minutes ago how surprising it is to hear people talking about him as an actual asset, not just being the lucky beneficiary of both not being the last leader of the Labour Party and not being Liz Truss or Boris Johnson. Being Keir Starmer is a positive, whereas I think for a year or more of his leadership, his greatest plus was not being somebody else. Oh, that's quite a nice observation as well. Thank you for leading me to that with the quality of your calls and an awful lot of praise coming in for my callers. I'm so comfortable now, ego-wise. I don't mind that the praise coming in for the programme today is about 90% for the callers, only 10% for your humble presenter. Sally, for example, says, I'm really loving the show, James. Brilliant subject, explored from many angles. I'm getting a real rush of hope to the head. What a great way to start the weekend. Thank you. No, thank you, Sally. 8 minutes after 12 is the time to crack on with this. I think we don't need another one of my lengthy introductions at the top of the show, except I'll read this from Chris, because I've been thinking this for a while, Chris. I think the key thing here is that he's an ex-barrister. He'll be all over the detail of things rather than the absolutely useless Tory corrupt liars. Your words, not mine. But that's always been the possibility. That's always been the hope with Keir Starmer, that he will bring a forensic legal brain to political problems that Boris Johnson would address with a balloon on a stick. Sadie's in Maidenhead. Sadie, what's going on?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thank you for taking my call.
Very
First
welcome.
time speaking to you.
Thank you.
I think people are wanting to vote for Starmer because they feel safe with him. I think we have a worn-out, traumatised nation, even whether, it's COVID, war, energy crisis. So even if people aren't personally affected and traumatised, they've been living with the trauma, so they're experiencing a form of secondary trauma. And when you're traumatized people, you need the people who can contain that and can cope with it and help you cope.
That's so interesting, because if we were in a more peaceful period of politics, we might be attracted to the popinjay or the peacock, the showman or the sort of ringmaster.
Yeah, so I'm a foster carer and lived with fostering traumatised children for 18 years.
Gosh.
And one of my key roles is to make them feel safe and to be able to, even if they hate being in care and hate being here, they want to know when they come here they can feel safe and be cared for and it's going to be okay. So my role is a theory around containment, to be able to take all that they're going through, absorb it and say, it's okay, I can cope with it. I can cope with it, no matter how awful it's been.
Yes.
It's okay, we can cope with it. And I think people look at Starmer and they think, he can cope. He can actually take this and he can actually cope and he can make it better. And I don't think people are looking at the Tory party and thinking, oh, they can make it better. They're interested in caring. So I think it's a feeling. And once you've got that feeling, it's, it changes things, doesn't it?
It does. And I
think feeling safe with Starmer, I think, is really key.
That's a good slogan, actually. Isn't it, as well, as a great observation? Safe with Starmer. And it is personality. It's psychological, that, more than political, isn't it? It's just that idea. Here's someone that wouldn't be having a knees up or introducing a culture in Downing Street so that his colleagues were having parties on the night before Prince Philip's funeral. It just wouldn't be that. It wouldn't happen. It'd be a different universe. It would be, even if they didn't solve everything and no one's going to fix any problem and nobody's perfect, you just have an air of care and of competence, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. And against the right-wing media, he's managed to somehow achieve that. It's not long ago the Daily Mail had 10 consecutive front pages trying to turn a curry into a crime.
I know they keep telling us to, have faith and trust and trust in trust and trust in Cameron and trust in Johnson and trust in,
Yeah, we've done that
people
now.
Are kind of like, well,
Look where that got us.
Exactly. So whereas we're actually looking at this person who does seem to have integrity and has lived it out and has made a difference, and thinking, do you know what? I think I'm going to be safe.
Yeah.
With your leadership.
That's a lovely way of putting it. I love the way you draw on your experience as a foster carer as well, just to see the country as a traumatised child and just.
Well, I know that as a foster carer, I live with trauma and live with traumatised people, and something you have to guard against is the impact of secondary trauma and how that wears you down.
Yes.
And I'm looking at a nation, and I'm hearing all these people, and there's so sad hearing so many stories, and you're thinking, these are traumatised people.
I think Mick, the first caller this morning,
trauma,
the very first caller this morning, Mick talking about his brother sounded pretty traumatised, didn't he?
Absolutely. That kind of brought a lump to the throat.
Yeah,
and
it did.
You're saying, so even if you're not personally traumatised, you're being impacted by that secondary trauma now.
That's really helpful. Of course it does, and it changes the way you look at the world, which is how people are able to change their voting intentions or their political loyalties, because the ground beneath our feet has changed and it has affected us. And you're right. I mean, it doesn't really matter where you sat on political issues. You've got these whammies of coronavirus, which was a sort of existential threat. It changed the way we thought about the world, changed the way we thought about each other, and everything from the working environment to the fragility of existence. And then you've got the war in Ukraine and the knowledge that Vladimir Putin is potentially every bit as evil as some of those historical figures that we read about in school. And then you've got whether you liked it or not, you've got the seismic shifts of Brexit, the division that it drove down the heart of the country, the families that it split up, and subsequently, because I don't blame everyone who voted for it for this, I blame the people who lied to them, subsequently causing all of these absolutely unnecessary and self-inflicted problems everywhere, from the M20 in Kent through to the export figures of a small cheese producer in Manchester. I mean, it is all bad stuff that has been done to us, largely as a consequence of fate, but in the case of Brexit, as a consequence of political leadership. And I think we all felt more frail and more fragile during the lockdowns and during coronavirus than we should have done. Well, we didn't all feel this way, because some people still claim he got all the big calls right, but the utter absence of clarity and leadership during coronavirus was traumatizing. That idea that the grown-ups will take care of it, that idea that the people in charge somehow deserve to be in charge. I know that sounds nebulous, but life can be nebulous. The people in charge somehow, there's a reason why they're in charge. They want to be there. They have a desire, when a storm hits, to be on the bridge battling through the storm. And then you got to coronavirus and you saw Boris Johnson on the bridge and you thought, crikey, how did that happen? And now Liz Truss is there, and she's brought a storm with her. It's 18 minutes after 12. Here's the thing, right? Are we gonna resurrect woke watch? I mean, it's not actually died. It's just having a bit of a kip at the moment. But do you think they're going to come back with woke watch now? Do you think they're going to try and address these political disasters, these economic catastrophes, by trying to get you cross about statues again, or footballers taking the knee, which they're not doing as much as they used to do anymore? I honestly don't know. Because I was thinking of reminding you, give me some examples, because it's always a nice bit of light relief when the news is pretty serious. We can do woke watch. But I don't know that they'd have the audacity to do it at the moment, to claim that the real issue facing the country today is toilets or school uniforms or Virgin Atlantic. I didn't even follow that story, to be honest with you. Apparently they're all wearing mankinis now on Virgin Atlantic flights. Is that going to work? The idea that I suppose if I'd told you to vote for Brexit and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, I'd be desperate to find a story about people in, I don't know, Portsmouth protesting about a statue or something. I honestly don't know. But it's not so much the media side of it intrigues me. It's whether or not the government, whether or not the politics of it will try to bring back the whole anti-woke movement. It was ridiculous all along, but I presume if you fell for it, you're feeling really stupid now. We were all screaming, look, this is bad. don't let this happen. And you're going, yeah, but statues. I don't know. Anyway, wokewatch@lbc.co.uk is the address that you need, the email address that you need if you want to send me an example of people using the word woke without telling you what it means, but with the very obvious intention of making you very angry about something you don't really understand. Okay, 03, and that's the phone number. Wokewatch@lbc.co.uk is the email you need to give me examples of woke stoke, we call it. As of now, actually, it's called woke stoke. Woke stoking. Woke stoking or woke stoke? What do you prefer? Examples of woke stoke, where people are trying to use the word woke to stoke anger and fear and distract you from the disasters being inflicted upon the population by the politicians that, quote, anti-woke, quote, people keep putting into power. Woke stoke. I quite like, no one is liking woke stoke. I like woke stoke. Woke stoke sounds good. What's that? Oh, it's an example of woke stoke. That's very good. Sorry, why is no one nodding? What? No, Woke Watch. You won't have to change the email address. It's still Woke Watch. And remind me of the sting. We're not changing the sting. It's not
Woke Watch.
What we will call it's Woke Watch, giving examples of woke stoke. So we're watching for the stoking. Woke Watch reports woke stoke. Are we clear now? So you see some woke stoke going on in the Daily Mail, for example, because, I don't know, a university has done what it's done for years and changed its reading list, but it's woke! That's woke stoke. And you report the woke stoke to Woke Watch, and we cover it on Woke Watch with a special little sting. Okay. Back to the main show now. 21 minutes after 12 is the time. But send me your examples. There was one in the Mail today, but it was a whole page, and I couldn't be bothered to read it. Let me see if I can find it for you to give you an example of woke stoke. Wait there a second. Here we go. Oh, this is strong. Did you see this one? This is strong. Enslaved by wokery. Come on, give me this thing.
Woke Watch.
Few institutions in the world have a prouder history of fighting slavery than Cambridge University, writes Dominic Sandbrook in the Daily Mail today, under the headline, Enslaved by Wokery. That's great, isn't it? Few institutions in the world have a prouder history of fighting slavery than Cambridge University. And because we're so supportive of their proud history of fighting slavery, we're going to compare wokery to slavery. Enslaved by wokery. I told you I couldn't be bothered to read the whole thing. Let's try and work out what they've done wrong. A history to be proud of and the past, but not, it appears, in the common room, but intellectual integrity. A history to be proud of, then, and a past to celebrate. But not, it appears, in the common room of 21st century Cambridge, where this is what I love about woke stoke, is that you're sitting there now worrying about your mortgage, worrying about your energy bills, worrying about your kids, worrying about your house, worrying about the future, worrying about the country, worrying about the economy, worrying about your pension. And the editor of the Daily Mail wants you to worry about what is happening in the common rooms of Cambridge University instead. You remember when I said to you a minute ago, if I told you to vote for Brexit and for Boris Johnson and for Liz Truss, I'd be searching for this kind of stuff. I didn't realise they'd search this far or stoop this low. So don't worry about your pension. Don't worry about your mortgage. Don't worry about your children. Don't worry about your energy bills. Don't worry about your food bills. Don't worry about the fact that 1 in 4 hospitals have now opened food banks for actual nurses. Don't worry. No, the thing you should really be getting cross about is this. Cambridge University common rooms have been enslaved by wokery. I've written before about the cult of narcissistic self-flagellation that has taken hold of my alma mater. Ooh, matron. No one wants a cult of narcissistic self-flagellation taking hold of their alma maters, do they? You can get an ointment for that. The most shocking example being Jesus College's flagrantly dishonest campaign to destroy the reputation of its own greatest benefactor, the 17th century philanthropist Tobias Rustat, whom Tobias Rustat? What? They've gone after Tobias Rustat? These self-flagellating narcissists who there's nothing sacred. Tobias Rustat, that well-known 17th century benefactor. I can't believe it. Do you know what they did to him? They condemned him for his investments in the slave trade. Jeez, they're dark, these woke people, aren't they? You've got to watch them. God, They're condemning people for investments in the slave trade while grabbing you right by the alma maters. Oh, dearie me. And that, I haven't even got halfway through the article yet. I'll read you a bit more. As for the priggish, hand-wringing tone of Professor Toop's dossier, which my readers would never have heard of unless I was having a performative fit of the vapours today on page 19 of the Daily Mail in return for money, this makes a mockery of its claims to serious scholarship. Every schoolchild knows that human beings in history have often behaved very badly. How does every schoolchild know that human beings in history have often behaved very badly, Dominic Sandbrook? Because it's taught to them. But in your world, teaching them about human beings behaving very badly is to be enslaved by wokery. I shouldn't do the voice for that. I should leave the voice to the sting. I'm sorry. And that is today's example of Woke Watch. And it is actually one of the best ever. So get your examples in to wokewatch@lbc.co.uk. Examples of what? Examples of woke stoke. I'm staying with this. I'm telling you now. It's not going anywhere. Woke stoke for Woke Watch. And I know that news about Tobias Rustat, the well-known 17th century benefactor of one college in Cambridge, being condemned for his investments in slavery. I know it's more important than the cost of living crisis. I know it's more important than the economic catastrophe. I know it's more important than the pound tanking at the beginning of the week and then being rescued with £64 billion worth of Bank of England reserves, which have gone now. The 500 billion quid Liz Truss is estimated to have lost since she came into power. So none of that matters. What really matters, won't somebody think of Tobias Rustat? Well, my anti-woke friends, I will think of Tobias Rustat at a time like this and make sure that we focus on the important matters. I stand shoulder to shoulder with Dominic Sandbrook of the Daily Mail in focusing on what really matters. Obscure 17th century philanthropists who've been condemned for investing in the slave trade. It's that sort of thing that we should be sticking up for. I'm glad we can all agree about something. Nick's in Pontypool. You better speak, Nick, because I'm having a bit of a moment.
I didn't think I'd get a chance then, James.
No, I'm not surprised, frankly. I was beginning to doubt it myself. What would you like to say?
Thanks for taking my call. First-time caller.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of, I've been Labour supporter all my working life. I'm from the valleys, mining community, and of course, when I was finishing my O-levels, 3 million unemployment at the time under Thatcher. Thatcher closed all the mines down. I never thought I would ever vote for Tory, but I got wooed in the last election to go Boris because I just couldn't bring myself to vote for Corbyn. Again, I haven't been that sort of enamoured with Keir Starmer, but you know it has to be now. He has to be seen as being a trusted pair of hands, and trust is so important going forward now because you know it's just this government has gone rotten.
Yeah.
It's just gone rotten.
How much of what you're feeling is warmth towards Starmer? I sense not a lot yet. It's more coldness towards Truss and the Conservatives, or am I misreading you?
Yeah, there's a obviously complete disillusion with Truss. But
what about Johnson? How quickly did you fall out of life? If indeed you did, I don't want to put words into your mouth. How quickly did you realise? Well, no. What do you feel about Johnson now?
I just think he was incompetent.
Okay.
And
you knew that when you voted for him, you just couldn't bring yourself to vote for Jeremy Corbyn.
I just hope. Well, yeah, it was a lesser of two evils.
Okay.
That decision. It took me a real long time to make that decision. I'd sort of. My looking back over generations, my family would turn in their grave and actually, they would know that I'd actually voted sort of Conservative. And I have a good friend in Cardiff, Di, who's a taxi driver, and me and him were talking all the way through this. And of course, he was giving me insights on people in the back of the taxis, and we were all torn. Do you know what I mean? But it's just gone. You think that with all the sleaze, it couldn't get any worse.
Mm. And then it kept getting worse. It's like they've trashed the sort of moral reputation of the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson has completely destroyed any claim to sort of Christian values or moral high ground. And then along comes Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, and they scrap their reputation for fiscal responsibility in 10 minutes flat. I mean, it is incredible.
Yeah. Oh, it's scary. And when I was younger, single mum. Sort of, we relied on council house and benefits, and I've always believed in, the more successful you get, the more money you earn, the more tax you should pay. But
Of
then
course.
just cutting the tax at the end is, it's...
That was an unbelievable gesture. And then some genuine fears now that they're going to try and claw back some of the cash they've given to people like me by taking it away or freezing or not giving the increase in benefits to keep it in line with inflation. We'll have a look at that next week. Nick, you've taken me up to the news. Go on, squeeze it in.
But if they go for austerity, that would be unforgivable.
Well, they would be austerity, wouldn't it? If they went after universal credit claimants as a way of saving
absolutely.
money, that would be austerity Mark II.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Oh, why Tory? Why Johnson in 2019? Not the Liberal Democrats or Plaid Cymru or someone else? Just
Johnson
out of interest.
wooed me.
Yeah, you just like the car. I fell for it in 2008, mate. It didn't take me long to see the error of my ways, and thankfully I only put him into the Mayor of London, mate. You put him into Downing Street. But hey-ho, let's not split hairs.
No problem.
Right, there you go, Nick. Thank you for that. 12:30 is the time. I think I've got another woke watch. I mean, it doesn't rain, but it pours. It's like buses, isn't it? You wait ages for one woke watch to come along, and then two come along at once. I shall take advisement on whether to share it with you after the very latest headlines with Tim Humphrey. It's 12:34. I've got another rope watch, but it's not funny. I know there's nothing funny about the maligning of the reputation of Tobias Rustat, that well-known 17th century philanthropist. But there's a horrible article in the Telegraph this week. I know that's dog bites man territory, but a particularly pungent article in the Telegraph this week that also contains the word woke in the headline. I may share that with you shortly. Loads of people still waiting to talk about Keir Starmer, with whom I think I'll go to Jane first. I don't want to keep Jane on hold while I talk to my guests because she's been there for ages already. I'd be surprised if she's still awake, frankly. I bet we'll cross to Jane in the Wirral. There'll just be a tumbleweed noise at the end of the phone line because she's gone to make a cup of tea. Jane's in the Wirral. Jane, what would you like to say?
No, I'm still here.
There we go. You're teasing me then. Thank you, Jane. Thank you. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I really related to your previous caller, who I think she was a carer. And she was talking about Keir. Yes, making Keir Starmer feeling like a safe vote. And I really feel the same. I mean, I'm a natural left-wing voter. I'm a Green Party member. So I've listened to a lot of Keir Starmer's speeches, and I've agreed with a lot of what he said. I've agreed with his policies, but I've not really connected with him.
No.
And that not long ago, I saw him give an interview, and I don't know if they were just filling in time at the end, but the interviewer asked him a question about his kids.
Oh, yeah.
And he stopped being a politician and a lawyer, and he was just a dad who loved his kids and was proud of his kids. And I thought, there you are. I'll vote for you.
You're like us. You're like us, you thought, didn't you? You're a bit like us in a way that Liz Truss and Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and the rest of them and Nadine Dorries, they're nothing like us.
It was so genuine, and I am so tired, James. I am of being ashamed of my government, of being ashamed of my Prime Minister. And when Keir Starmer spoke like that, I thought, there's a good man. I want to vote for a good man.
That's lovely.
For a change.
Do you know, I had an almost identical experience with him, but it wasn't him as a dad, it was him as a son. It was him talking about going to Buckingham Palace for when his... I think his mum was receiving an award for her charity work, and she was very immobile by then. They couldn't, she couldn't really get around, so they wanted to drive in a way that you can't usually do. You usually go in on public transport and make your way there on foot. But they turned up. Keir's mum and dad turned up with two enormous dogs in the back of the car because they didn't want to leave the dogs at home, and they're literally pulling in through the gates of Buckingham Palace, and the guards would say, "Well, what have you brought these dogs for?" I forget what happened. I don't know whether they went and had tea with the corgis or something like that. But it was such a human, and the way he told the story was with such a mixture of sort of filial embarrassment and love and pride that that for me was the moment where I thought, "Crikey, you feel about your family like I feel about mine," and I don't get that from... I mean, there's lots of Conservative politicians who would absolutely fulfil that category, but very few of them have been near the top of the tree for a very long time.
Yeah, exactly that.
And he's entirely self-made, as Dave reminds us, He's the archetype of a self-made man, which Conservative... I know you're not a traditional Conservative, I think you're Green traditionally, but traditional Conservatives should be able to warm to the self-made element of his success, his professional success.
And that was one of the things, actually, that kept me listening to your show, actually, James. I lost my dad not long after you lost yours. and I went through quite a bad time. And listening to you on the radio, coping so well and ploughing on.
Ploughing on more than coping so well, Jane.
Yeah, and it just made me think, well, I'm going to be okay too. James is okay, I'm going to be okay.
You're going to get me now, you know.
So I just wanted to say thank you for that, really.
That's one of the loveliest things anyone's ever said to me on the radio. Thank you. And I tell you who'd love that too is my old dad. Thank you, Jane. Have a great weekend. And
you too.
Thank you. It's coming up to 12:40, and that's what I mean. Actually, there in a nutshell about how when we spend our time together every day, it's not, for me, it's not just talking into a microphone and wondering who's out there. It's talking and hearing directly from people, one-to-one sometimes. But gosh, that's someone been peeling onions in the studio, Keith. I've told you before about letting people... It's Sheila Fogarty, isn't it? Peeling onions in the studio. Absolutely outrageous behaviour. Change of pace now. Change of direction. It was Keir's own knighthood while he was in the palace, actually, as he tells the story. His own knighthood. What a day. Your parents turn up with 2 whopping great dogs in the back of the car. Have a listen to the full interview at Full Disclosure. I promise you it's very special. The next conversation is going to be a slightly different one, though. Steve Barney is a drummer of international repute. The list, in fact, it'd be easier to tell you the artists he hasn't drummed with on international tours over the last few years. And Ian Smith is an agency owner and co-director of the Carry On touring campaign. I'll talk to Steve first, and then I'll talk to you, Ian, because it was your sort of public letter, really, Steve, that first prompted this flurry of interest in both your personal experiences and the broader malaise of what Brexit has done to your industry. So just talk us through where you were and where you are.
Well, good afternoon.
Hello,
and,
Steve.
Thanks for inviting me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I'm only doing it to get free tickets at some unspecified point in the future. Let's just be absolutely clear about that from the very start.
Okay,
all right.
We are clear on that. No, but basically, as I've shared with you, and you've obviously reached out to me about this scenario, that I found myself after many freelance musicians, for 2 years of not touring whatsoever, until I found myself with a really lucky call in late March of this year, when a friend of mine, a guitar player called Milton McDonald, called me to play for a Italian artist called Gianna Nannini, who's a really respected singer-songwriter out in Italy. Of course, I accepted with open arms and flew straight across to Italy to start rehearsals and, started playing the shows and had a great tour with her, visiting all across the EU and Schengen area of many countries. And it dawned on me, I was so glad to be working. I wasn't thinking about anything else other than the music, which is obviously that's why I was there. Yeah. But as it dawned on me sort of a couple of kind of months into it, thinking about the post-Brexit situation of touring and the problem of UK residents only being allowed to be like 90 days within 180, I started thinking, hang on a minute, I've got to start counting my days up here. So I reached out to Ian, and I reached out to various visa agencies and Anastasia's manager and production manager. And basically, because I was booked for the Anastasia tour, which is now actually happening.
How many years have you been drumming with Anastasia?
Since 2009. Okay. So
a
12, 13 years, yeah. And she's been very loyal to me and vice versa. So I was booked for that. But as I was midway through the Gianna Nannini tour, and I was, every route that I was looking at to try and gain extra days in the EU Schengen, I realised that by the end of the Gianna tour, I was going to be up to 78 days, which left me with 12. And the Anastasia tour was 6 weeks in the EU Schengen. So my scenario, but obviously I had to let Gianna know that I was going to be leaving her tour slightly early. And because of that, I subsequently lost the 2 weeks of summer shows with her, the 2 weeks work and finance. And then it kind of, as we started putting the kind of gas on the situation with literally, confirming some type of a Schengen-wide visa for work purposes, we realised that all roads of
there isn't one.
Looking at this, it basically doesn't exist, James.
You can do. I mean, as you've said, you can do the 90 days in 180, and then you're out of it until the 180 days are up.
And it's basically like an egg timer situation, which is just not going to work. And I want to say from the heart here, this letter which was kind of like egged on by my good friend Peredur Ap Gwynedd, who plays guitar for Pendulum. He really told me not to sort of suffer in silence with my own situation, because ultimately, this needs talking about, because it's not just about musicians and all the people that this covers, the touring industry. There's obviously lots of other sectors that are going to be heavily affected by this, and it's a major concern. So to summarise, unfortunately, Craig Logan, Anastasia's manager, had to make a call on this, and I was let go from the 3-month tour with her. Because they couldn't use me because there's no legal way of having me on the tour. And here I am at home and she's out on tour because of this scenario, which is just not good.
So the impact is financial, but also emotional and mental. I mean, especially after COVID, and we all have, security. We all think about security, and you now have not just had the rug pulled from under your feet, but in a sense it's been snipped into little pieces in front of you by Brexit.
Completely by Brexit. Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's just beyond frustrating, financially, exactly right, emotionally. And I'm very aware how I might sound. I know doing what I do is a job I love, and not all people have the opportunity to do something they love. And I'm really aware of that, especially as a 51-year-old bald man who's done everything I could.
We've got a lot apart from the drums, we've got a lot in common.
But ultimately, mate, I just, I'm aware that I could sound like I'm being.
No, you don't. You don't need to You don't need to self-edit. I mean, everyone can imagine what it would be like to be perfectly, conscious of how lucky you are to be doing something you love and then having it taken away from you for no reason whatsoever. I think I'll talk to Ian after the break, actually, because I want to ask you one more question, Steve, which is this. I think there's a sense of shock here, even though you were, fairly up to speed with developments. You knew that you were sort of in a bit of a pickle, but you just presumed that there would be some sort of solution to it, right? Because the alternative was too huge. The idea that a British drummer with your track record and reputation, not just Anastasia, Annie Lennox, Eagle Eye Cherry, Jeff Beck, Mike and the Mechanics, Sugar Babe, The Wanted, SAS, but the idea that suddenly your ability to tour has been at the very least chopped in half and at the very worst completely destroyed, it didn't quite compute that could be the case until suddenly it was.
Exactly. And it kind of dawned on me as we were kind of going. By the way, me and my guitar player colleague on Gianna Nannini, who equally, like me, was unable to finish the Gianna Nannini tour.
Right.
And I don't mind sharing this, and I'm sure Milton won't mind me sharing this with you, because in one of the breaks on the tour, him and his wife went to Lake Garda for a holiday, like people do.
So they clocked up the days. They clocked up the days to the 90.
He was, and he was like he should, and like any human being should do with free movement, is be able to choose where they go on holiday. But now that type of scenario will go against you, because simply arriving in the Schengen area starts the clock counting. So he lost the final part of the tour and the financial element of that. So going back to your point. That I wasn't head in the sand about it. I was aware of it, but it's almost like too much to comprehend.
Yes, I get
that there is such an egg timer situation going on with people, and maybe because touring only kind of restarted properly this year, that me and my friend Milton are like the first two kind of canaries in the coal mine with this situation.
Yeah.
But here we are, sat at home, not able to finish off.
And worrying, of course, finally worrying that because you're not as free as a German drummer or a French drummer or a Spanish drummer, I won't go on.
Well, exactly.
That even acts that really want you and managements that really want you are going to think, well, we're going to have to go with someone who's not going to give us these headaches.
Listen, it's hard enough to listen. I'm not the best drummer in the world. I'm not even the best drummer.
Who is the best drummer in the world?
Phil Collins, obviously. He was. He was my major influence.
Was he really?
Because
people normally say John Bonham. I know he's no longer with us, but
John Bonham's phenomenal. But I think it's maybe to do with my father took me to see Genesis with Phil on drums when I was 9 years old. Genesis played in Great Yarmouth of all places. I think they were lost, and I went to see them there, and I had a massive impact on me seeing such a great band. So Phil's thought of in many different ways, depending on
I get
what
it.
people think. But he's a phenomenal drummer.
And that's it.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me your stage to talk about this. This is not about me.
No, and it's something that I think our government consciously elected not to address and help with, if I understood the facts. But Ian will know a little bit more about that, I think.
Ian will definitely know, and I encourage him to sort of share stuff with you. Yeah.
Steve, take care. Have you got anything on the horizon? I hope you've got some work in the diary.
It's very kind of you. Well, I'm just about to put the bins out. Apart from that,
when you put the bins out, do you have a quick before as you put the lids?
Yeah, everyone knows it's me. It always speeds up slightly as I walk to the. No, in answer truthfully to your question, Gianna Nannini has got some shows at the latter part of this year. Funnily enough, back in the EU in Schengen, but because of how this works, and maybe Ian will explain how it works, that because I've been home, I gain days back, so I'm able to do the work back in the year. So it's kind of, so I do have work with Gianna back in the
I'm glad to hear it, and I hope that the change of air at the top of the government and ideally, I mean, it's impossible to get a Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport who would be worse than the last one, but hopefully the new one might have a little look at this. We'll find out a little bit more about the bigger picture from Ian after the break, but in the meantime, Steve Barney, thank you very much indeed. 12:49 is the time. 12:53 is the time. I got a bit carried away there talking to Steve, probably because we're fellow drummers. That'll be what it is. But Ian Smith heads up the pressure group or the kind of movement, the Carry On Touring campaign that is seeking to address some of the problems that Steve just told us about. He's a co-director of Carry On Touring. How many Steves are there out there, Ian? I mean, how widespread is this problem?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Really nice to be on the show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
There are gazillions of Steves, frankly, and Stevettes. I'm not sure if that's a female name, but there's lots of them. The thing to remember, though, is that this is not just about musicians, it's about all creatives. And in fact, because they're in such an interesting position of doing lots of short-term, very quick work in and out of the EU,
yes,
it creates massive problems. I know I haven't got much time, so I'm going to do this as quickly as I can.
I'll just shut up then. I'll be quiet.
No, keep coming back out if you've got any questions. But the deal is we have the Schengen problem and the UK problem because it's totally reciprocal. 6 months in any 1 year, 90 days in 180. Schengen, EU count it backwards 180 days each time, which is what Steve was referring to, getting his days back. Just to contextualise this, I've been a music industry professional, creative arts professional for about 35 years, musician, used to be a drummer. There a long time ago. And then about 20 odd years ago, people kept saying, be an agent, Ian, be an agent. I was going, no. And then I
don't know that that's a compliment, Ian. I've got a level with you.
No, I know, mate. I know. So I eventually went, all right then. And it grew out of there. So I've worked with everyone from really basic beginners all the way up to actually another famous drummer. I'm Phil Rudd's agent from AC/DC. But I work with Cirque du Soleil as well and various bits and pieces. And what hacked me off a lot 2 years ago, apart from fighting the situation we have now, is that I was getting a lot of feedback from European promoters and UK promoters and people saying, well, I'm not sure if I can book this act. What's happening? And there was no information, zero. So I started a free website called ukeartswork.info, which was to just give information, totally self-funded with a couple of mates. And we put that out because no one else was doing it, including our illustrious government at the moment. And as a result of that, Tim Brennan, who started the petition, my co-director and co-founder of Carry On Touring, reached out. And from then on, we ended up at a House of Lords meeting on the 6th of September this year.
Yeah.
And actually, I have to say this, apart from the chair noting there was no one from the Tory party there, we got,
it's momentum, though, isn't it?
I hope you don't mean that from the Labour Party's perspective.
No, I mean you're picking up momentum now, even if the Tories aren't there, and you're properly organised. And we are going to run out of time. So I'd tell people to get to Carry On Touring. It's at Carry On Touring _. In 10 seconds, Ian, what are you looking for? What do you need?
What we need is a visa waiver for the Schengen visa, Schengen periods of time, so that people can carry on touring to avoid human costs, financial costs, cultural costs, and soft power costs. How's about that?
That's beautifully done, mate. Well done. And I mean, you know this, so I'm not raining on anyone's parade, but you're unlikely to get that while the negotiations are held up by the ludicrous sort of attempts to rewrite the treaty over the Northern Ireland Protocol. But, you know, the mood music is the best it's been in a while in that area, I'm told. So fingers crossed for you and for Steve and for all the other creatives who are essentially being prevented from pursuing their livelihoods by the brilliance of Brexit. Andy Burnham, the guest on this week's Full Disclosure, fascinating politician. He had a very good conference. He is someone who He's happy to criticise the current leadership, but I really, really enjoyed talking to him. In fact, latterly, I've been enjoying talking to the politicians almost more than speaking to the people from other walks of life. Let's see what you think of this.
In a sense, the bogus levelling up agenda was an attempt to steal your lunch, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, at first it sounded like it was, trying to put wind in our sails, but, the pandemic experience sort of blew that apart, didn't it? Where, they were trying to kind of railroad us into tier 3 by giving...
Another moment when you sort of left the reservation.
I absolutely was way off it by that point. I mean, but it was people always down here, and Rees Mogg kind of made this big thing about it. It was pure acting and grandstanding. I can't remember what he actually said, something like that. They misread. Westminster. I don't think people down here ever understood me because they misread what I'm kind of about. Really, I'm not always playing those games as they were in the Cambridge Union or in the. I'm not doing that. Where it's. I will generally speak as I find, and where the government has done the right thing, I'll say so. But when there's a point of principle, i.e. you're not treating people in Greater Manchester equally as you would people in London, then I will use what political skill I've got to make my voice heard as loudly as I can. And that's what I did. But then the world down here immediately said, oh, God, these mayors are just troublesome and we'll get rid of them and all the rest of it.
And is that the loudest your voice will get now? Mayor of Greater Manchester?
Well, I'm just going to answer this honestly because I know gone are the days where I talk in code. So I'm not making any plans for any sort of immediate return. I've talked about doing a full second term in Greater Manchester, but I've not ruled out one day coming back because there is part of me still that says, how does this country start to work for everybody everywhere? It doesn't work for everybody everywhere. Those kids I went to school with never ever got anything like the opportunities that the people I was at university with. So how does it? And I think for me, where I've come to on my political journey is that you've got to rewire Britain, basically. You've got to rewire Parliament and then the political system beyond it if you are ever to make this place somewhere that works for everybody everywhere. So for me, I have now come round to the idea of proportional representation for the Commons because I think the whip system and first past the post and the whip system actually empowers a small number of people in this postcode that you and I are talking in now. It does, it hands power to about 50 people in and around Downing Street and in the cabinet to make a huge number of decisions of massive consequence for 60 plus million people. And that can never be right, can it? So proportional representation for the Commons, an elected Senate of the nations and regions for the Lords, maximum devolution out to the great cities of England and beyond. For me, you've got to rewire the country.
Andy Burnham speaking to me for this week's Full Disclosure. Very personal and political and everything in between. That's it from me for another week. Time now for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Another week. Time now for Sheila